The church is here for the sake of the world. We're not here to self-sustain. We're not here to take care of ourselves. We're not a little in-group to make sure we can fight off the bad world out there. That's not what we're about. We are about witnessing to that world. We're not afraid of it. Christ is our Lord. He's going to take care of us. We take that message to the world with confidence. Young men can learn by watching their fathers, but their fathers aren't setting a good example, which sometimes happens. They can learn from other men who can teach them. And that's what the church can do without apology, without being ashamed. Christ comes to redeem the whole creation. He comes because God loves the world. Well, he wants his whole creation back. That makes the creation a good, positive thing. So that means living in the creation, living in this material world is part of God's plan for me. And that living in this world needs to follow his plan. Well, his plan is called the law. The Synod needs to act like a church. Yes, we have business stuff. We're a corporation. Man, we should be doing it like the church. We should not look like one more worldly institution.
All right, and then it says we are live. So welcome back to On the Line. And today we've got Dr. Joel Biermann back. This is your third time here.
Yeah, 3. Hard to believe.
Yeah, and we were just talking about, fascinating fact, over there in the corner is the old baptismal font from Trinity's previous location downtown.
Yeah.
And you just connected. You were baptized with that font.
That's right.
Yeah, so that's really cool. And because your dad was here on vicarage, is that right?
My dad served as vicarage here. I was born during the vicarage year, then he was serving, and so that would have been the font I was baptized in. Yeah, kind of cool.
And didn't you guys live above a mechanical shop or something
exactly
like
right. I've seen the slides. My dad took pictures, and so they were living above a mechanical machine shop, and it was like an apartment above it, and there was like a gangway to get to the front door.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. That's why you keep coming back here.
That's right.
It just keeps drawing you back. So
that's it.
Yeah, well, today we're excited. We've got kind of a unique episode. So for those that don't know, every 3 years we have, for the most part, we have our LCMS convention, and a handful of things are dealt with at the convention.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing too is that is where we vote, and this actually takes place in June, so leading up to the convention.
Right.
But that's where we decide on who our next synod president is.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those situations, you were kind of describing it last night, that for we've got 6 names on the ballot.
5 names.
Or 5 names on the ballot.
Yeah.
And it's not as if those 5 people fill out applications, make an announcement that they're going to run, fundraise, do all of the things that we would see in the normal political landscape. But rather, someone calls you up, says, hey, would it be okay would you let your name stand if a lot of churches elected you or put you on the ballot, nominated?
Yeah.
And so that's very much how it takes place.
Yeah.
So it's not as if you said, I'm going to scheme, I want to do this. They asked you, right? And they said, would you let your name stand? You said, I'll let my name stand. And then you got a lot of nominations. So
I guess I did.
Yeah.
It's a funny kind of polity. You have to choose people to serve in some way, and that's how we've decided to do it. And so it creates some kind of odd situations because we've got 5 guys who are all in the same church body together. Nobody's running, and we're not campaigning, and yet we're all on the ballot because that's how the church decides to do it. So how it goes.
Yeah, so what we're doing here on the line is we did send invites out to everyone to give everyone an opportunity if they want to come on the line and just say, hey, here's some of my thoughts. Here's where I see we can go for the LCMS. Here's some of my theological convictions. Here's what I think that the Synod needs for growth and health and all of the things and, confessional identity and such. So we sent invites out to everybody. I don't think we're going to have everybody on. We're still having communications with a couple, but so point being, on the line's we're not endorsing or whatnot. We've sent it out to everybody, and we're going to have these conversations with those that are interested in doing that.
Great.
So
great. I am happy you invited me. I'm happy to talk. It's good to do it.
Yeah. So just to kind of map out for those, kind of the categories that we're going to go through is I've kind of broke it into 3 main categories, and then we'll kind of have a 4th, which is kind of a closing. But the first one will be kind of a vision. All right, so we'll talk for a little bit about what are some of the opportunities, what are the threats, what are the things that we can accomplish as a synod that brings health, helps capitalize on perhaps some opportunities and unique opportunities that we have of bringing people back into the Lutheran Church. And then we'll move on to the theological categories. So that's where we'll deal with theological questions, some convictions on that front and such. And then the last section we'll move into is administrative. And that's where we'll have some more kind of detailed questions of what's that going to look like? So for the listeners, those are the categories that we're going to kind of flow through. But maybe to for those that maybe don't know you all that well, if you can just kind of give a little bit of your background, kind of some of your experience, kind of what your resume has been within the LCMS.
I'll try to keep it quick.
Yeah.
So I was born when my dad was a vicar, and so he was a Springfield grad, and he ended up serving parishes in Minnesota. Actually, Vicarage, Minnesota. Then his first call was Southwest Canada, Alberta, and we were in Nebraska, and then in Michigan. So I kind of grew up in parsonages in the Midwest. And I went to Concordia, Ann Arbor, met my wife there. And then we did our vicarage in Ohio, Parma, Cleveland area. And our first call was actually Bemidji, Minnesota. And then we went back to Holt, Michigan. And then I went to the seminary, left the parish, went full-time because there was no reduced residency program or anything. And I wanted to be able to capitalize on, people were telling me, you should be teaching. So I thought, all right, I should probably do something about that. So I went and did a PhD at the SEM and worked that through about a 4-year stint, just leaving everything and doing that full time. And then was called to the seminary as soon as I finished up in 2002. I started teaching at the SEM then that summer of 2002. So I've been teaching there ever since. Systematic theology, interest in ethics, Christian life, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And what's the name of your, well, you've written a couple books, right? But the one that you talked about the last time, I'm trying to remember where you were.
Well, my dissertation was on character formation and virtue ethics. So that book is Case for Character, and that was published in 2014. Then in 2017, I wrote a book on church and state kind of things, the two realms. That's Holy Citizens. And then recently, CPH published a book called The Two Realms, which is a much more condensed on that topic. And in between, I also, wrote a book, Day 7 from CPH. And that's about Sabbath, Christian life, living within the plan of God for what it means to be living in a holistic third commandment kind of way of keeping the Sabbath.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember the last, maybe 2 times ago when you were here, you kind of steered me in a good direction. One of my interests are the 7 deadly sins, and you really pointed out, and it's there the more research you do in a big way, especially in the early church, that sloth, right, can mean sluggardliness and laziness, but it can also mean like an over-industriousness that gets in the way of doing the proper spiritual goods that God lays before you.
Right, yeah. The whole idea of acedia being the inability to worship God, the inability to live in tune with God's purposes. And I think that's a widespread sin. People just get busy, 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 and it's actually acedia. So, yeah, that's Day 7.
Yeah, one of the interesting, after that, and I was doing research on that because I presented on it in a couple places, and one of the interesting things is if you track it historically, Hume was a big character in that he started to shift the lists. There's different lists. 7 Deadly Sins was a good theme. But when he had his vice and virtue lists, the virtues were very heavily focused on one, pride. So pride moved from like the chief vice over to one of the chief virtues. So that's a big shift. Yeah. But then a lot of his stuff had to do with industriousness. Are you producing economically? Are you generating wealth?
Right. Yeah.
So
yeah, and what's interesting is Hume putting pride back over on the virtue list. That would have been what Aristotle would have done, because for Aristotle, pride is not necessarily a negative thing. It's being a right assessment of yourself. And if you have done a lot, you should be proud.
Interesting. Okay, so I didn't know that was kind of going back to Aristotle as well.
Because the idea of humility, the Greek style humility as a vice, that's bad. You're just groveling. That's not cool.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And people have said that if you would have met Aristotle, you would have thought he was a jerk, because he was not. If you're like below him, he wouldn't give you the time of day. He wouldn't have deigned to do that, because that would be injustice. You don't deserve that from me.
So the way the church fathers thought about vice was completely different. Yeah,
completely. Following Christ is completely different than following Aristotle. That's why you have to be careful with just virtue. You don't want to just recapture the virtues. Some of them aren't worth recapturing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's why I like the 7 deadly sins and the virtues that correspond, because they and especially when you read the church fathers, even just like the narratives of some of the martyrs and such, like you just see the such a heavy focus on that.
Absolutely.
Like I'm going to give this estate away, and I'm going to go serve the poor and start a hospital and all this kind of stuff. Like that was, the early church was geared towards that in a big way.
Definitely. The whole life.
Yeah. So maybe we can bounce back to some of that when we get to.
Well, and I did a 5th book too. Since I was thinking about my book. Yeah. That's the very first one I did was kind of a set book that CPH needed someone to write on the men. And so this was Courageous Men of the Bible was the book I wrote. And it's like different Bible. They gave me the list of men they wanted me to write on. So I did. So I wrote a chapter on each of these men of the Bible. And that was kind of fun to do, actually. That's still out there.
Yeah, looking at like David, and I'm sure. Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, let's jump into kind of what your vision here is. So this is the vision for the LCMS, and this is just kind of hypothetically saying, okay, if you were to step into this office, like, what do you see as some unique opportunities and how to capitalize on that?
Yeah. Well, see, I've been Lutheran my whole life, been LCMS grew up that way. And this is the way I know the church. This is what the church I know. And I love this church because we have such a solid foundation in God's reality. And the way I like to look at this is, and I teach this all the time, is that it's not like the Lutheranism is a denomination or one branch of Christianity. Our understanding is that we are living fully in line with what has been the teaching of the church from the very beginning. There is this regula fide, the rule of faith, the analogy of faith that's there from the get-go, and it's just guided the church all the way through. And the church always is sorting out things that are in or not in and trying to keeping things on track. And all that Luther was doing was trying to say, hey, wait, we're off track here on some significant things. We need to get back where we need to belong. And he was trying to bring the whole church along. When the Roman Catholic leadership said, no thanks, we like things the way they are, they were compelled basically to start their own churches. They were reluctant. They don't want to. And so the idea of Lutheranism as a doing our own thing, never been the desire. Our desire is to be in line with what the church has taught consistently right down the line. And that's what we try to do. And so I look at the Lutheran Church as being the faithful expression of what it means to follow Christ today, in tune with all that God has given us, and then paying attention to the world around us. So I get excited when I think about all of the heritage we have, the 2,000 years. And it's not just the 500 years of Lutheran history. No, it's the whole church's history is ours. And we are living in that. And we have that to offer to the world. And the world desperately needs to hear that message. And we have it. And so I get excited about the possibilities we have of actually bringing that reality more fully and more faithfully to people who are very much in need of that.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that we've been tracking on this show, and we've had a handful of interviews on this recently, just kind of looking at some of the data, some of the cultural trends and such. And one of the unique places we're in today that we weren't in 5 years ago is that there's been, and, as we were talking about before, we'll see what the trajectory for this is. But at least the data point today is that there's been a pendulum swing away from kind of a hyper-liberalization, if that's the word you want to use. Certainly kind of a, David Ramirez calls it the great awakening, right? That things, in a very quick amount of time, we went from, President Obama, when he's running for the first time, he has to say, whatever he believes, I don't know, but he has to say publicly, marriage is obviously between a man and a woman.
Yeah.
We're not going to touch that.
Right.
And then by the time his second term, you almost can't even say the opposite.
Oh,
That's
no, he's got
drastic
during his tenure, you've got the White House lit up like a rainbow flag.
Mm-hmm.
And this happened when he was president. And so they're celebrating the whole passage, the Supreme Court. Now, women, 2 women can get married, and we're all celebrating at the White House.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that was a definite shift.
Yeah. So that was, 10, 12 years, where that was the switch. And obviously, those opinions are still there, but we were watching with Ramirez, especially when you get to Gen Z. It's like a 13-point swing in 3 years. And I think that might have just been young men, if I remember right.
It's men who are leading this. That's
yes, men are leading this. So we're seeing this return to conservative type values or traditional type values, not even only politically speaking, but that's also rippled over to where especially young men are starting to return to the church.
Correct.
So how do you see us positioned and how do we take advantage of that?
And some of that's kind of the Jordan Peterson effect. Jordan Peterson has definitely tapped into this whole, mindset of we're tired of living in my mom's basement. We're tired of being told we're losers. We're tired of being told we're bad for being men, and they're willing to recapture this. And you've got Jordan Peterson telling them flat out, go to church, go find a church. This is Peterson's solution. And so it's like, here's the church, there are people coming in. Where are they coming from? Sometimes they're being sent by Jordan Peterson. I've had guys tell me at the SEM, they've actually had people show up at their church saying, Jordan Peterson told me to come here.
Wow.
So, I mean, I'm not saying he's all of it, but he's tapping into something. And there's demographics are showing this. Now, where this plays out long-term, what happens, the broad cultural trends and the currents of things, we'll see. But it's encouraging. And if we've got guys who are interested in coming back to church, and I'm seeing couples showing up at the congregation I'm serving in a vacancy pastor right now, people showing up because friends have invited them. They're showing up out of the blue, and they're just interested in, what's this Lutheran thing? What's this all about? You guys have got deep roots. I'm interested in these deep roots. What's going on here? And that's cool. I mean, definitely. So we need to be ready to offer them something and be paying attention to what's going on with the opportunities out there. It's exciting because the world is creating a lot of doubt. This goes to the big trends. We're living in this world that's very nihilistic, where people are convinced there's no foundation, there's nothing you can be sure of, there's lots of things that are true, and it's your job to go find what's going to be true for you. And that's basically the quest everybody has to be on, because there's nothing given. There's no God to be sure of. There's no church to be sure of. There's not even, foundational truths. There's just whatever you think. What do you feel? And this is why you've got, just an example of this, you got K kids being told, you got to start thinking about, are you a boy or a girl? What do you feel inside? And it's like up to you to decide. Mm-hmm. Well, that's the way it is all through life on everything. That's crushing. It's crippling. Because if you have to decide everything that matters, what's true for you? And if it's just your choice, it's not real. This is the deep problem of the nihilistic culture. It seems so freeing and liberating, but it creates this huge angst of what's real. How do I know? And that's why people start saying, maybe there is something to this God thing. Maybe there is something to what the church has. And that's why you even have people flocking back to the Roman Catholic Church, which is supposed to have been totally shot down by all the scandals. But no, people are saying, I want something real. I want something that matters. And so people are looking back at Rome, but they're also looking at other churches. And the Lutheran Church needs to be ready to say, yeah, this is who we are. This is the heritage we have. This is what it means to know who God is, who you are, and what it means to live life. We need to be ready to answer those kinds of questions with confidence and with real zeal.
What do you think are the unique strengths that the Lutheran Church has in comparison to some other denominations around us to speak to that issue?
We are so well situated for this because we go all the way back to Christ. We pay attention to the history of the church. We're not trying to just jump over 2,000 years of history and just the Bible, like an evangelical. All we need is the Bible. And you're just ignoring all the heritage and all the things that have helped sharpen things and keep things on track. We pay attention to that. And we also, though, know the gospel. And so we're not wrapped up in all the hierarchy and all the kind of liturgical shenanigans that Rome gets into or the Eastern Orthodox get into. And some people see that as a huge attraction, but when the gospel gets obscured, it's not cool. That's not good. And one of the things that obviously drove Luther was the gospel needs to be front and center. People need to know that God has given them forgiveness in Christ, and the people need to know that God has redeemed them in Christ to live the way he intends. And we have all of our theology in place to do those things really well. And we have so much going for us. And it's exciting to think about how that could play out if we actually start to embrace that and do those things.
What do you think are some levers that are there for us that maybe we aren't pulling yet, maybe we're partially pulling? Like, what are some levers that we have to communicate that, to be united around that, kind of the articulation of that, especially if we're focusing here externally, those people that are not in the Lutheran Church currently, what levers do we have?
Well, you're one of these levers. And, these podcasts, this actually paying attention to the media, people are not buying books or going to the library to find stuff out. They're looking on their computers and they're hitting the internet. That's what all the young people have been trained to do. That's what they do. So they're going there for information. What's Lutheranism all about? They're going there to find out. And we need to be there providing not just neat little slideshows with a couple little talking points, but in-depth stuff. So what you're doing is good. And we need to be providing ways in so we are saying this is what we're all about. Our congregations are a huge strength. Because the thing that people need more than anything in our culture is a sense of, this is where I belong. This is the place that teaches me God's truth. This is the place that teaches me how I should live. And we're not afraid to do that. Mm-hmm. This is the place that teaches me that God has plans for me and has grace for me. And I come here on a Sunday morning and I receive his gifts, his forgiveness, his assurance, and I get direction for how I should live my life. And I come back on church on Wednesday and we have a time where we just share a meal together. Everybody who comes together. And then we share some time of learning and we worship together during the middle of the week. And then I hang out with some of these people on Fridays because they're my friends now. And we get together and we play games. And then a couple of these guys we actually go camping with or we go hiking with. And your whole life then starts to being built around the congregation. We have a long heritage of this. And congregations, long generations ago, function as the centers of communities, the centers of life for these people. We can embrace some of that. We're not going to go back to being, we're going to have barn raising together, or we're going to have the quilting bee, but all kinds of things we can start doing as the community together in the congregation. So we have the congregations in place. Embracing that, recognizing the strength of that is we've got this just waiting. And then all of our theology, of course, is a cliche. Our great theology. You hear it all the time. But it is. It's solid because it's God's theology, it's God's truth, and it's in tune with what the church has taught. We're not trying to be novel, new creators. We're not chasing after the newest, coolest thing. We're just This is what God has taught. This is how it fits in the world today. That's what we do in systematics. Here's what God's truth is. Here's how it applies today. And that's where we pay attention. And if you got people who are directionless, we better be leaning into that because we've got that in our theology. It's not like we have to create it or we've got a hole there. No, we've got all kinds of stuff. Large catechism. What's that all about? This is how to live the Christian life. Luther spent most time on the 10 Commandments. Why? Concrete direction for how to live life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jonathan Peugeot and I think Jordan Peterson, they both talk about like when a culture starts to fracture, there's a time of chaos. Mm-hmm. But then during that time of chaos, what people are doing is they go back 5 years and then 10 years and 20. They're looking for what's this firm ground. It's like if you're out in the water, right?
Yeah.
You're like, where's the place that I can go grab hold of so I've got some kind of stability? And so it sounds like you're saying the Lutheran Church has those kind of things to offer. It's like, here's some stability. We're not just creating it. We're not doing it this reactionary of like, what do we think that they need?
Yeah,
Although,
right.
that might be a part of the application per se, but that this is built in, and that's an advantage that other denominations don't have.
That's right. And we have this heritage, this history, and it's part of who we are. And it's built in. That's exactly right.
So obviously I'm interested, you brought up the media aspect, and obviously that's one of the lanes we're in. I mean, there's tons of guys out there that are doing good work with Brian Wolfmueller and, and such. So what do you see some opportunities on things that we can do on that media front as far as communicating this and putting this out so that the 23-year-old that's just searching what is Christianity or whatever, like that they don't join the Catholic Church or, the evangelical church down the road and then die 50 years later and never even know that the Lutheran Church existed.
They never were here.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't want to get into a competition, but there is that sense of we have people doing good work, like you said, a lot of it going on. And it tends to be kind of fragmented and everybody kind of just does it organically. Mm-hmm. I'm going to start doing this because I think there's a need. And there is a need. Maybe we should be a little more deliberate working together and be a little smarter about that. And kind of that's what synods are supposed to do, is help us work together. So I wouldn't be opposed to thinking about maybe what the synod should be thinking about, how we work together using some of these resources instead of letting them just be outliers that are confessionally Lutheran and now we're doing our thing, but they have no other connection besides the claim that they're confessionally Lutheran and they happen to be LCMS guys doing it. Maybe we should be thinking how we can work together on some of these things together, be a little more coordinated so we have a better, more cohesive presence. And maybe the synod is itself even willing to link to some of these things. That gets scary because the control thing always comes into play.
Yeah.
But that's where the trust comes in as well. We trust each other and we kind of hold each other accountable along the way instead of trying to make sure everything's locked down up front necessarily.
Yeah. And you don't have to comment on this, but this is an area where, I've done some research. And when you look at the Catholic Church is the one I've done the most research, but you can see like the Catholic Church itself recognized. And when you've got over 100 channels with 100,000 subscribers, I mean, they're massively ahead of us, but they do get, institutional type funding support, all this kind of stuff to whereas, I know that all the different ones that are on the ground level, like we've got to go out and we've got to find individual donors, right. Everyone's kind of doing the same groundwork. And I think it would be good if at some point you get some kind of, synod can be involved in it, doesn't have to be involved in it. Either way, like it is a good thing to say, can we work together and not be all duplicating the same work?
Right.
Because that's a lot of administrative type work.
That's right.
Yeah. So what are some threats that you see to those opportunities? In what ways can there's kind of an internal, external. So especially internally, in what ways can we shoot ourselves in the foot?
Yeah, well, internally, we can shoot ourselves in the foot by not trusting each other and by assuming that the different camps are at odds with each other. We all have the same confession. We all share the same desire of proclaiming the gospel faithfully and clearly to people and forming and shaping them into be followers of Christ. We all want this, and we need to recognize that. And we all, in the Lutheran Church, our Missouri Synod, we all subscribe to the same confession. We all hold that together so that we shouldn't be seeing ourselves as so factionalized and so broken up. And I've talked about this other places too, just this sense of kind of a wariness, almost a fearfulness that comes in that, I'm not towing the line. And so someone's not going to like me and I'm going to hurt myself. And I've encountered that in too many places where you have pastors who are just hesitant to talk freely, or they're afraid of what people might think of how they're doing things or how they're operating. And there needs to be a greater openness where we don't function with that fearfulness, where we're able to embrace this is what it means to be God's church today and do it without fear. So the fearfulness is one thing, and that kind of the infighting is a big part of the problem too, I think, within our internal kinds of dangers or weaknesses.
Mm-hmm. How do we address that threat kind of overall, but then also what role does and could the presidential position have in accomplishing that?
Yeah, I think the presidential position has, and it's kind of cliche, but you just kind of set a tone, the way you approach things, and the sense of the openness to, I have my ideas, I have my preferences, I have what I like. I definitely have my preferences. My students all know my preferences on things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not shy about that, but they're my preferences and they're opinions. And if it's not a matter of doctrine and I don't have a doctrinal leg to stand on, then I need to kind of hold back on this stuff and recognize there are lots of ways of doing things. And I might not like that other way, but it's certainly valid. It might even be really good. It might even be better than my ideas or my preferences because I'm just idiosyncratically me. And that doesn't make me great or the standard for anything. And I know that. And so I think the willingness to be humble about my own opinions and recognizing lots of ways of doing things that can be really good about being the church faithfully helps a lot. Just, tones that get set matters a lot.
How does communication play into that?
Enormous. And communication is always hard because you think you're being open and trying to share stuff, and maybe you're being selective of what you share, or maybe you're not being as open with everybody you need to be. And so communication's an interesting thing because we have so many avenues for it. And yet the willingness just to be open is part of that. And then there's always the danger of, some things you can't share, but it gets frustrating when sometimes it seems like the trump card gets played of, well, this is a personal matter or we're in process or this is an issue of church discipline, so we can't talk about it. And it's like, no, everything just shuts down immediately. And I know there's a sensitivity. We're all pastors. We know how to be pastors. We know there are times we don't talk freely, but there's also the openness about what we can talk about and what we can be honest about, maybe what's driving us, what our motives are, what we're trying to accomplish. A little more transparency there, I think, is useful.
What kind of things do you think have led to some of those divisions? Because they're certainly there. We talked about them in a couple of recent. So what kind of things? It probably takes time, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And maybe there's some tangible things that people are doing, and you don't have to name by names, but like just habits that we have that drive that wedge.
Yeah, we all like what we like. I've got, and worship is a big one still. The worship wars, it's been going, we're talking to us forever. And I've said in other places, I think the worship wars are largely won in the LCMS. And it's pretty much, we're going to do things the LSB way. And that's kind of the standard, but it's not universal. And people still have uneasiness about that. And not everybody's on board with that. And that's where I think it's easy to say, well, this is what I know is right. And this is what I'm convinced is right. And therefore we should all be doing it this way. That's never how the church has operated. And we need to recognize that. So that's one of those areas where you went to school can play into this.
Mm-hmm.
Who your favorite professors were, that plays into this. I like this guy. I like this guy. My day, you're a Nagel guy. No, whatever.
Yeah.
And so it plays into this. And, the Nagelites, definite certain kind of, I know how you think then. And that plays into it. And that can all be positive and good because we have our favorites, we have our ways of doing things, but it can also become really detrimental when you start allowing those things to calcify into actual divisions. And let's not discount the satanic factor here. We take Satan seriously. He's not an idea. He's not something created. There's a real being called Satan who wants to destroy God's work. And he's really good at that. And he's had a lot of practice. And sowing discord in the church, creating divisions that don't really matter, creating distracting issues, he's really good at that. And he knows how to, sow this kinds of situations or the kinds of things that happens, orchestrating circumstances. I believe he's very much involved in that. Now, I don't want to, Satan's behind it all and everything's satanic.
Mm-hmm.
That gets crazy too. But we need to recognize we need to work extra hard at giving each other the benefit of the doubt. Let's employ a little more eighth commandment. The way I learned it, put the best construction on everything, explain his actions in the kindest way. And this can get abused too, where we don't ever deal with anything. But there needs to be some long suffering of, I should think the best about my brother until I'm proven otherwise. And I should give him the benefit of the doubt. And if I'm not willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, I need to go and talk to him to find out what's going on. Maybe I need to do that anyway, but a lot more conversation, face to face. Let's talk here. And there are guys who, I've met who I think I know what you're all about. Then I talk to them, I find out, it's far more complicated. And this has become a situation too in our synod where it used to kind of like, we all know who's in what categories, 3 or 4. There's like 12 categories now. And the people move around between them so quickly and so fluidly. And it's hard to know who's what anymore. And I think that's not all bad, because maybe that should remind us that, the things that really unite us are far more fundamental and important. And all these differences should not cause these sharp divisions in how we operate and how we think and how we treat each other.
Yeah, I think that communication thing, and we were talking about that last night, right?
Yep.
But that communication thing's big. And what I've noticed is, because we've had the gift on this to talk to people from kind of all around the synod, and especially.
By the way, I'll interject. This is a great thing that you pull in people from all over the place. That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's why I like coming on here with you, because you're not selective only this segment. You'll take anybody. Yeah, that's great. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's been something I think I've increasingly enjoyed. I think at first there were some people or categories where I thought I understood like that person, or that camp, and I had them put in a box from afar.
Yeah.
Right. And then I would meet with them, and it doesn't mean that after meeting with them I might not still have disagreements.
Yeah. Or you're suddenly transformed.
Right. Like, oh, like he's the best. And it's not even he's the best, or it's just there's things that you think that I disagree with, and then you do the gut check of, okay, like how serious is that? Like, well, do you deny the Trinity? You kind of go through the list, and you're like, okay, we're actually way more united than 98% of the people I walk past in the grocery store. That's great. We have this 2%. It's important that we discuss those things. But when you begin that discussion, you realize there, as you said, like there's not 2 or 3 things, there's 12 things. And you might find something where you go, wow, you and I are really akin on this. And I would never guess that we aren't akin here. So it makes it turns the person into a person, right? Rather than a caricature.
Right.
So I do think that's important. Now, what are there things that we can do as far as the synod goes? And we've got circuits, we've got pastors' conferences, we do have a lot of things. I don't know, are there other things that we can cultivate to kind of help with that?
Well, if we would start taking our circuits or our Winkle gatherings a little more seriously, I think that would be a huge step. I still grieve when I hear about pastors who don't go to their Winkles. Either they're too big or they don't talk about things I care about. That's kind of inexcusable. I've tried to really instill in students that you have a responsibility to go to your circuit meetings, whether you think it's worthwhile or not, because you need to be there. Your presence matters. You get to know these other guys. You talk to them. They become people. And we need to cultivate that. And it'd be great, too. I know circuits that get together and they hang out with each other for a little while. This is a really good thing. We're not just checking a box that, okay, we did our 1 hour. We had our little discussion. We should be cultivating relationships. That takes time, and I get that. And time is always a high priority. But if we care about the church that we love, and we care about working together and encouraging each other, we need to invest time in that. So just doing that's an important thing. I know most of my graduates now coming out build strong connections with each other, and they often continue those through online meetings, and they have these kinds of ongoing things, which is great. But they're not a substitute for face-to-face. And so I think it's wonderful that they can maintain these online social relationships through social media, but face-to-face needs to keep on happening. And those guys all know that too. And so we need to really pay attention to our responsibility to the fellow pastors in the circuits and to our districts and do those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's good. I think that's important. Kind of moving on here in the vision section. So I'm going to ask, I'll preface this. So why do you want the job, and how long are you prepared to serve? And to preface this, to go back, you did not say, you know what, I'm going to run. And I'm going to plan this and da-da-da-da. Will you let your name stand? Yes. But now you're letting your name stand. And I think you're doing the right thing, which I remember talking to Heath Curtis, and I said one of those dumb things you say that are cliches. And I was like, it was something along the lines, because he's district president now of, what is it? Southern Illinois. Southern Illinois. And I was like, oh, did you, was it really tough, or did you, was it heartbreaking to leave? And he's like, no, I when I made the decision that I would do this, I was all in, right?
Right.
And that's a good approach if you're going to do something. That's right. Well, I don't know if I want, just go do it. So, why would you want this position at this point now that you've been asked? Yeah. So when the nominations came in back in February, and I had gotten enough nominations to be on the ballot of one of the 5, I said, fine, I'll do this, because my attitude is always, if God directs me in a certain direction, I'll follow. And if the church wants me to do something, I'll do that. I'll consider it. And so the question of why do I want this job? I decided a long time ago it's not what I want, because what I want is really not that important. And if I gave you an honest answer about what I want, it might surprise some people. But it's not really important what I want. I like what I'm doing right now. I like teaching at the seminary, but I also want to do what God wants me to do. And if that means leaving the seminary to do something else and become a synodical president, something I had never dreamed of, ever wanted, never even considered a possibility, but it's not what I want. It's what God wants me to do, and what the church decides to have me do, to use it, whatever gifts I've got in service to the church. I'll do that. That's what I want. I want to follow Christ faithfully, and I want to use the gifts I've been given the best I can. So anyway, when the nominations came in,
I talked to my wife a lot. We prayed about this and discussed it, and let's do it. We're going to go all in. And so that's why I'm doing this. I'm going to give it all I've got and see what happens. And when the votes are come in, it's fine. Whatever happens, happens. I'll go with whatever the church decides, whatever God decides through that vote. I can trust that.
Or do you have any idea of how long a tenure like that could look?
Yeah, I have no intention of ever retiring from whatever I do. I think retirement is kind of a weird modern idea. So as long as I have the wherewithal to keep on doing something and I'm thinking straight and have the physical stamina to do stuff, I'll keep doing it. And I don't have any end date in mind anywhere yet. So I figure 10, 15 years, whatever I've got, I'll keep on going as long as I can. My model here, my idol is Reverend Francis Rossau, and all the guys at St. Louis know this name. He was a prof of the senior college way back when. Then he came to St. Louis. He's 100 years old now. He turned 100, and he still comes to campus regularly and attends chapel in his suit and tie coat, and he does this regularly. He was teaching until not too many years ago, even a few classes. And I just love Rev. We just call him Rev Rossau. Rev is my idol. He just never quit. He just kept on doing. And he's still coming to campus, and he's an encouragement to us. I love the guy. So that's how I want to do it.
Is there a point, do you think, and you can punt on this answer because I don't know if there's a good answer to this, but I do wonder, like, is there a point, are there data points to see when you say, you know what, I've served for 6 years or I've served for 9 years, but you know what, I think it's time for somebody else. Like,
I think there's definitely something to that.
Yeah.
And while I'm not saying we need to have, term limits or something, I think there's definitely something to turnover in leadership is a good thing. I know church denominations where they take turns, like you serve a 3-year stint and you have another guy and it's required and they just kind of rotate it around. Their leadership is probably much less demanding or whatever, and they can pull that off, and they're probably doing other things. But I think there's something definitely to be said for letting things roll over a little more frequently. That's probably a good idea. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to invoke this, and I don't want this to sound accusatory, but it's true though. Lord Acton made his famous quip a long time ago, that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And what I've come to be really convinced of is I don't think this is some sort of alarmist declaration he's making. He's just putting his finger on the reality of how humans are. And humans are always going to be sinful human beings. So we're always similar to this epicator. We're striving to be followers of Christ and the new man and doing things his way. But the old man still hangs around. We know this far too often. It's the reality. But power is one of those things that's really hard to call out as a problem, because we expect people to have power to do certain things, but we know it gets abused. And we often get wary of people complaining about the abuse of power, like, oh, you're just whining, complaining because you don't like authority, you don't like things getting done, and that's what you're going on. But it does get abused. And this happens. And it happens in the world all the time. We know this. And it happens in the church too, because people are still human in the church. And I joke with my students, I have power in the classroom. I'm the professor. I get to decide what I want to do. Do I like that? Yes, very much. And it's fun. This is when this is when the paper's due. Boom. Can I drop a grade if I want? Yep. Can I say, you don't have to do that paper? Yep. And I can just do it because I have that authority. It's heady stuff. And it really is. And so you have to be really careful with the power and using it. And when you use it a long time, you get really used to it. And when you have the ability to make directives and everybody has to do it, it's kind of heady stuff. So you have to be, I think, really deliberate about that. And sometimes maybe just knowing when to step away from that kind of power leadership is also part of wisdom, I think.
Do you think there's tangible practices to engage in to kind of help with that temptation, or the to let that power corrupt?
Yeah. The tangible practices are the communication and staying in community with others, and being held accountable by others and being transparent and open. There are lots of leadership styles, and leadership style is part of this, but there's also part of the kind of the determination to make sure that the way I operate and the way I use the authority I have is in a way that's constructive and good for all involved. And I think there's a real deliberation that comes into play here, that you're determined to make that happen. And you do that best by making yourself accountable to others. And it can be accountable to your own family, to your wife, to your own family, but then accountable to your congregation, then accountable to your peers within the ministerium. We're all brothers in the ministry. We need to take that really seriously.
Very good. Well, let's move to the theological here. And we kind of already touched on, I had here kind of the theological opportunities. I think you've articulated that of we've got something that goes back 2,000 years. We've got, we've got the Book of Concord here, which you've been teaching on for quite some time, or at least, so we've got that. That's really healthy. That seems to be an opportunity for what people are looking for theologically. Let's go to this one here first. So one thing that gets talked about a lot, you can see this will not even be a main topic, and you'll see a lot of our speakers go here because it's something that a lot of people are thinking about in the theological realm, but even on the practical realm, even on the parish level, I think people are wrestling with this. And there's this little debate on kind of the third use of the law.
Sure. Little sometimes huge debate.
Sometimes huge debate. Yeah. Kind of the use of that. Yeah. There's different terms. Sometimes sanctification's used. We'll go with what Christian Einertson, who's a good friend of both of ours, he put together. He said, well, training in righteousness and mortification of the flesh are the two categories. Meaning, training in righteousness is kind of the positive, right? What are the things that God has asked me to do, and how do I cultivate that? How do I do things that help support that? And then on the mortification of the flesh, saying, I've got a weakened flesh that is always searching for sinful things to try to satiate that hunger. How do I discipline that? So what's your view on how we as the Lutheran Church should use and utilize the third use? And what's kind of your theological take on that?
I like the term new obedience. That's AC6, the new obedience. That was the title put on there, and I love that. So the sense of being obedient to what God has given us to do. I've been thinking about this stuff a long time. In fact, I came back to the seminary to do my PhD, and I chose the area of third use of the law. And then my advisor, Dr. Chuck Aaron, said, that's been done too much. Do something else, a little different. And Okamoto gave me the idea of trying to, can we answer the charge that Stanley Hauerwas made that Lutherans can't do ethics because they're so hung up on justification? So that became my focus, and that's really what I'm trying to do in Case for Character. And so I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time and really interested in this and care a lot about it. So the way I look at it is we need to look at the big picture. Christ comes to redeem the whole creation. He comes because God loves the world. He's not coming just to save my soul or to save just a few lucky people. He wants his whole creation back. That makes the creation a good, positive thing. So that means living in the creation, living in this material world is part of God's plan for me. And that living in this world needs to follow his plan. Well, his plan is called the law. It's what it is. And this is the formula of Concord, that the will of God is the law. The law is something more than the will of God for how creation is supposed to work. It's FC6. And so if the law is the will of God, I should be paying attention to that. And as I've said, and as you brought up again, the old man, he's there. He's a problem, and I need to keep him in check. Well, the law helps me do that. And so the church needs to be really comfortable and eager to actually talk about the law, not just as the thing that shows you're a sinner so you can know that you need God's grace, which is there. That's that traditional second use, which we zero in on. But we've always been a little wary of, well, that third use, that's kind of Calvinistic. That's just junk. That's just such garbage way of talking, because it's not Calvinistic. Read Luther. This is the whole burden of my book, Case for Character, is this is baked into Lutheranism. It's because it's baked into Christianity. And so living the Christian life, living a faithful human life is part of what it means to be God's child. It's what it means to be Christian. We shouldn't be afraid of it. And so when we are wary of third use that, we're putting people back into the law, no, we're returning people to what it means to be fully human, living their lives now God's way, which means according to his plan. He directs it. Sometimes that's hard because my old man gets in the way and it's uncomfortable. Yeah, welcome to life. Training in righteousness. It's not always easy learning the right things even though it's a positive thing. Yeah, but sometimes it's hard to learn those new habits. And you know this from your memento work, the whole idea of habituation. It's hugely important. And so you see, this has always been part of Christianity, and it is part of Christianity, and it's part of our Lutheran heritage because we're faithful to the whole thing. So we shouldn't be wary of this. Yes, it's the law. It's God's will. So what's the problem with that? If you're trying to use the law to win God's favor, that's a problem. If you're trying to use the law to win brownie points with God, that's a problem. If you're trying to use the law to win salvation, that's a huge problem. We're not talking about any of that.
Yeah.
We're talking about being the creature God made you to be, figuring out how that works. We don't just know it intuitively. And that evidence is there already from the fall. In the Garden of Eden, Adam's given direction before the fall on how to live. He doesn't just intuitively know, oh, here I am, oh, I should do this. God gives him direction. And that's how the law works for us. So this discussion about wariness of the third use law is just so old and so dumb. I'm just tired of it. I don't get people who are complaining about this. And, there's no threat to the gospel when you have these things squared away. And yeah, I'll invoke the 2 kinds of righteousness because I think this is a really helpful tool to use working this through. St. Louis has been doing this now for 20 years. And I know even other pastors are realizing this is a Lutheran way of thinking, a Lutheran way of operating, and it is. And so we recognize that the righteousness we have from God, all gift, and we have this righteousness before him, and he simply gives it, and we have this assurance of our salvation before God, coram Deo, and then coram mundo. I am now freed without having to earn my salvation to go and be the creature God created me to be and go serve in the world. And God's law teaches me how to do that. That doesn't threaten my gospel salvation. It doesn't make me think I'm earning God's favor. It just makes me more deliberate about living the way I should live. So I'm a better husband, a better professor, a better guy all the way around. I'm not a jerk, or I'm not self-focused, and I'm not trying to, make myself better and better and add virtues so God loves me more so I can be a better person. I just want to be the person God created me to be because that's what he put me here to do in the first place.
Mm-hmm. So 2-part question here. Why? Because without a doubt, if you were to kind of just take a pulse of the entire LCMS, right? There's going to be a spectrum there, and part of that spectrum is going to be people that very much shy away from it. Mm-hmm. So 2-part question is, why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that apprehension or confusion is? And then second, what happens when that manifests, let's just say like in a church life or in a community life?
Yeah. So there are people who are still wary of this. There are reasons for this. Scott Murray's book, Law, Life, and the Living God, that he wrote a few years ago, it was his doctoral work, is really helpful in trying to trace some of the history. I know he got a lot of blowback on that and people didn't like it, but I think he put his finger on things quite accurately. The reason we are where we are is some concrete historical things. It goes back to the Luther Renaissance of Althaus and Hull, and then the Bad Bull conferences where we had all of our LCMS leadership interacting with these guys and bringing this stuff back. A lot of what was driving the fracture in the 70s, the walkout and the Seminex and all that was really driven by a lot of this kind of attempt to be more Lutheran. And it was thought that somehow to be more Lutheran is just the law kills, the gospel makes alive, stand back and let the good works flow. Mm-hmm. This was considered to be like the best way to do things. This was the Lutheran way to do things, not this weird Calvinist law stuff. And that was just the driving thing for a long time. And it held on I can say from experience at Concordia Seminary, well after the walkout settled the Bible issue, the law gospel reductionism just lingered right on going on. And what I mean by law gospel reductionism is everything is boiled down to law kills, gospel makes alive, law bad, gospel good. And of course, nobody says that because, the law is God's goodwill. But de facto, how we operate, we're acting like it's a bad thing. So those histories are still there. Now, not everybody who is wary of the law still has those reasons. Someone coming out of a pietistic background where they saw the law being abused. Someone coming out of an evangelical background where they were pounded with the law their whole lives. And sometimes the most ardent gospel lovers are those who came out of these horrible backgrounds. Mm-hmm. I get that. And so we have people in our church body today who didn't just come out of the law gospel reductionism, but came in for other reasons, but now are wary. And I get that. So we need to always trumpet the gospel is the most important thing. But nobody's challenging that. And nobody's threatening that. But the problem is, if we end up pitting law and gospel against each other and we just embrace the gospel, we have nothing left to tell people about how to live. Mm-hmm. You're left with saying, just go and live in God's grace. Okay, but how do I help my teenage daughter who's having some issues with her self-acceptance? Well, just live in God's gospel. He'll teach you. He'll show you along. Just love her. Love her unconditionally. You need concrete specificity, and God provides that. And the church provides that. And we shouldn't be afraid to express those things and to make it clear, this is what God would have you do. This is how we do these things right. This is how we live right. It doesn't threaten the gospel. They work together because the gospel actually leads us to live these lives. This is Luther's whole point in his Galatians commentary when he says, when I have this righteousness in me, the righteousness of faith in Christ, he says, I return to another kingdom like the rain returns to the earth, and I go and do the things God has given me to do. And then his 3 examples are a pastor, a magistrate, and then the pastor, magistrate, and then the home, the father. And he just goes right down the list of the 3 estates. And I go do those things that God's given me to do, and I do them with joy. Mm-hmm. That's the Christian life.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a deep hunger for it. Anecdotally, even data-wise, I think you can make a claim like there's a deep hunger for it. And there's a deep hunger for it, especially because the culture is not speaking to those things. Right. So how do I be a good father? There's there's 100 different ideas,
right.
and they're all conflicting.
Right.
And if the Christianity gives you tools on, well, here's how you should be a husband to your wife.
Right.
And here's how you should be a father to your children. And here's what training in righteousness for your children looks like. And how do you, and people do not just naturally know that.
No.
People that are in church every single Sunday for 15 years, they do not necessarily just naturally know that. I don't naturally know that. Right. I continue to have to go and go back to the Bible and go back to good historical writings that give me some context for that.
And it's not just the the Bible's going to tell you how to discipline your child in every situation, but the Bible gives us the grounding, and then the church has lived in that reality all these centuries, and now we together work on this. And so, in other words, young men can learn by watching their fathers, but their fathers aren't setting a good example, which sometimes happens. They can learn from other men who can teach them, and that's what the church can do without apology, without being ashamed. It bothers me when I hear people making fun of, this church is having a Bible class on 10 steps to be a better father, or, why are you making fun of that?
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing shameful about that. To give concrete specificity to things. This is not saying we shouldn't study Ephesians and we shouldn't study justification by grace through faith in Christ. Yeah, absolutely. I'm all about studying AC4 and let's know our confessions. But let's not be afraid to give people concrete stuff either. There's absolutely a place for that. And we shouldn't shy away from that.
So how does this play out then in pastoral formation at the seminary? Which obviously you've been there you've probably got a lot of thoughts on this, but it seems like that's necessary as part of the pastoral formation.
It is. We at St. Louis, we've been trying to pay more attention to this, and we've been trying ever since we did our last curriculum reform. We have this thing now in the curriculum called formation labs, and all we do is we get together with guys once a week and just talk about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be a pastor. And different profs handle it different ways. But what I do in my lab is pretty much we just talk about things they're experiencing, how they're thinking about it, and there's accountability there. Now, that's a step. I think we can go a lot further. We should be going further. One of the problems is we have come through the whole Western Enlightenment, which was very cerebral and very much a head kind of a thing. And the church addressed this really nicely. We can give good cerebral answers to every question. We've got answers. We can do our scholarship. We can be, really academic. And we've done that well. And our seminaries are great at teaching a lot of information and giving that academic stuff. But I wonder sometimes if we're paying enough attention to the formation and moral formation, personal formation, just the kind of being a man in the world that you need to be. We need to pay attention to that and be even more deliberate about that and start figuring out how that happens. It happens best in homes. It happens best in congregations that hold each other accountable and take this stuff seriously. Some congregations do this. Some congregations are still a little wary of this. We don't do that kind of thing. We don't talk about family life.
Mm-hmm.
We just do liturgy here. We need to be talking about all that stuff. The church always did. You think about these house churches. They were living life together. That's what made them so powerful. And this is what the old churches did when the immigrants came over and had their little congregation out in the sticks of South Dakota, and they would, go to the church. That was life. And there's an accountability there. And the guy who's not doing things right in his family, there was pressure put on him to straighten things out. And he knew it. We've lost some of that, and we need to get some of that back. I think the seminary should be a place that does that a little more deliberately. And that means we get into people's lives. Yeah. We're always wary about that. We have no problem judging their thinking and giving them an exam on how well they know their Greek declensions or, how well they've got the confession straightened out. We'll give them all kinds of tests and test knowledge. But for moral formation, we should be interested in that too. And not just checking them, what's your online life like? You watching pornography? We've asked the big question. There are lots of questions we should be asking and lots of things we should be sorting out to deal with these kinds of issues and thinking about the whole man, not just his head, but his whole life and how he lives and how he raises his family and how he interacts with his wife and how he treats her. All that stuff matters. And we shouldn't be afraid to address those things and find better ways to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's important.
Yeah.
We've certainly lost it. If you go to Africa, it's just so apparent. They know this person struggles with this person struggles with this. Have you checked in with so-and-so? This thing happened, and immediately the pastor in the community is aware of it, and they're looking on how to deal with this.
Yep.
And that's just. I mean, it's Christianity. It's also just humanity. In some ways, we've just lost some natural law of just how we live our lives.
That's right. And part of it's because we have become so too cerebral. Part of it's because we've become very fractured in our Western culture. We can live very insular lives, and the internet doesn't help because we have all these connections, but it's all very private and it's very curated. You don't have the kind of honest, I just saw how you talk to your kid. That's not cool.
Mm-hmm.
And let's talk. Or, how you're treating your wife, something's not right here. What's going on? You see, and that only happens through the interaction with each other and spending time with each other, the face-to-face being with each other. It's really important we do that stuff. Congregations that are healthy do it. It just kind of happens. And it's an organic thing. But there's also maybe a choice to make it a deliberate thing when it's not just happening organically the way we want it to.
Yeah. So let's move to, let's go to this. Let's go to kind of the unity aspect.
Yeah.
We were gesturing towards a little bit here, but I'm kind of interested on what are some of the guardrails, right? And by guardrails, I mean, we talked before, so-and-so over here is doing something, and certainly at first glance, and maybe at second and third glance, don't love that, right? So you talked about kind of this, let's start to have conversations, let's reach out to that person, let's get to know what's going on, and then hopefully you can build a familial bond where at some point you can say, listen, man, like this really is too far. Like, can you hear where I'm coming from? But you can do that in that context versus, throwing stones from afar. But what are some of those guardrails? So like when does something go too far?
Yeah, so talking about worship or practice or even, just how we think about what it means to be a good, faithful pastor. So I think there are some guardrails. The first obvious guardrail is our common confession. You better be holding to your confession. Now, I will also say, it bothers me when I hear people say, our confessional doctrine's solid, we're rock solid. We're just doing some interesting things on practice. I never buy that. Mm-hmm. And I've long said, that's a lie. You cannot tell me your doctrine is solid if your practice is aberrant or doing something goofy, because your practice and your doctrine always go together. And what you're doing is actually what you do believe, because lex orandi, lex credendi is not a dictum for how we set our doctrine, but it is an anthropological, sociological reality that what you do will absolutely shape what you believe. We all know it's true. It's just the way it works. So that's got to be, in other words, our confessional unity should play out in how we actually live our lives and how we do our practice. And we can't just say, yep, we got this thing set and it's on the shelf there. There's our trophy. We've got our confessional credentials. There they are. We're good. Now we're going to do our stuff over here. No, you can't play that game. Now, that doesn't solve everything and doesn't solve a lot of stuff. The other thing is, I guess, so far as guardrails, is I am more interested in asking questions about why. When some congregation is doing something, my question is, why? What do you think you're doing here? Why is this happening? Well, we're reaching people. Are you? And what are you reaching them with? What are you giving them? And what kind of messages are you sending? We're always sending messages. This has become one of my real concerns, is the witness we give to the wider world. And whatever we do, we're sending messages. If we start campaigning for a certain candidate who's got far-right position, we're sending a message to the world. If we start, looking like the evangelical church down the road, doing all of our, cool stuff, then we're sending a message to the world of who we are and what we are. And you might say, well, that's the right message. But is it? Is that the fullness of what it means to follow Christ? Is it the fullness of God's riches that he gives us in the gospel and in his word? Or are we cheapening it? What are we doing? And we should be asking ourselves the question, what kind of Christians are you making by the way you do things? Are you making lightweight Christians with your lightweight way of worshiping? Are you making Roman Catholic Christians with your Roman Catholic way of worshiping? Mm-hmm. We should be asking that question. And so we should be asking a lot about, why are we doing? What are we trying to accomplish? Instead of just, I read this somewhere, we should try this. Or this cool pastor is doing this, I'm going to start doing that. Or this guy had a lot of success, so I'm going to start doing that. That's a bad reason to do things. The better reason is think it through, think about what's going on in your context. What did it mean to be faithful? And how are we working together on this? And so the other thing I would say is maybe not even so much guardrails of, here's the list, this is acceptable, this is not. Okay, smoke machine's not acceptable. That's passé. That was 60s anyway. Whatever, in your smoke machine in your worship service. So I don't think I'm ready to set up a list of, here's the things that are okay. Here's the things that aren't. You never do this. Always do this. That gets you into trouble all the time. Far better is to say, am I doing what I'm doing in consultation with my brother pastors in the circuit? Are we talking about this stuff? We kind of seeing the value in this? And maybe we can try some experimental stuff. There's room to try stuff. I'm not saying we've never done it. We can't. That's just, that's silly. We should be willing to try things and experiment things and try new ventures, but we do it with an accountability to each other. Rarely should you be the Lone Ranger who, I just had this brilliant idea, I'm going to go do it. Talk to people, find out what's going on, check with it. And if nobody gives you the big red light, step into it and check again. How's this going? Is this doing the right thing? And if I'm doing things that are just stirring everybody up and causing all kinds of flack, that could be good, but it's also maybe you're just being a pain. And maybe that's not such a good thing. And you need to think about, is this accomplishing what I really want it to accomplish?
Mm-hmm. So are there certain things that you can kind of say out loud, this is too far? Like I'll give you one and give me your opinion on this. But one thing that makes me wary is when you have a sermonette, taught by a woman.
Okay.
Right. Because I think that I think that the Bible's pretty clear. I think our confessions are pretty clear that, they might say, well, it wasn't a sermon. It was like a sermonette or something like that. Like within the divine service, of course. I'm not saying there's a women's Bible study or something like that.
Yeah.
But are there examples like maybe that one specifically or things that we need to say, and not from a day one edict type of thing. Biermann steps in and now he's like, if this happens, you're out kind of a thing. But of saying, this is something we need to agree on. Let's have some conversations. Can we sit down? Can we meet? What's your thoughts on it?
Conversations are the key thing. And so the example you give is an interesting one, because I approach the whole question of women's role in the church really from an order of creation standpoint, that we need to make sure that what we're doing is upholding and advancing and celebrating God's plan for how man and woman should be working as husband and wife in a relationship and a marriage, and then how that spills out in the rest of life. I don't like to operate with here's the list of rules. You can do this, you can't do this. I think that kind of misses the point.
Mm-hmm.
Does a woman serving as a pastor honor the order of creation? No. It's out of bounds because it's completely subverting it. That's why we don't do it. And so there's a woman teaching, subvert that. Not necessarily. What's the situation? Who's present?
Mm-hmm.
These are things you need to sort through. And so is it, so a woman leading a chapel during the school day, probably would say maybe it's not a bad thing if it's a teacher. But the question is, wait a minute, what do you mean by chapel? What's she leading?
Mm-hmm.
Devotions. And so we start getting all these fine lines. She can lead a devotion in the classroom, but she can't do it if she's in the sanctuary. That we need to think it through. Semiotics matter a ton. And so your example of, are there clear lines? Yeah, there are lines. We don't do things that thwart the order of creation. We don't do things that act like we don't care about what God's will is for how man and woman should function together and the right ways of functioning. So we need to honor that. But how that plays out, that's where things get interesting. And that's where we have the conversations. Why is she doing this? What do you think you're accomplishing? Why are you doing this style of worship? What do you think you're accomplishing?
Mm-hmm.
Why have a sermon series on that topic? Is that really worthwhile? Do you really want to broadcast that? Is that a good thing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what do you think the presidential office can do to kind of deal with these things, right? Because obviously at some point, let's imagine you become president. At some point during those 3 years, like someone's going to step over the guardrail.
Yeah.
And so
I don't think it'd be out of line for a president to call up a pastor and say, hey, brother, what's going on?
Mm-hmm.
And I know you can't call up every single president, pastor, but this is where you have the relationship I would envision of working with the other leaders, district leaders, circuit leaders, and just having conversations and getting people together and say, tell me what's going on there. Why? Why is this happening? How's this fit? And that sense of mutual accountability, not writing, imposing a law or, you must conform, but the sense of why. Let's iron sharpen iron here. Tell me what's going on. Why do you think this is a good thing? Help me understand how this fits with our Lutheran goal of bringing people to fullness in Christ. How's this fitting with that? How's this helping? And maybe it is, and maybe it's not. And if it's doing it, let's get this figured out together, and we can do it more effectively, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. And if it's not, then
you say, why are you part of this?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you want to hang around? Why do you want to keep LCMS buried somewhere on your webpage in a corner where nobody can see it? Why bother? Why are you doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you still think you want to be part of us when you're really not acting like you're part of us?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. So this one, that one's kind of bridges. Let's see.
You see that I'll add on to that just a little bit, because I don't want to forget to maybe say this. It comes into just how we think about what church discipline looks like. And maybe I think we need to think about that a little more carefully. That sense of, are we accountable to each other? Absolutely. And see, the church discipline, when you read in the New Testament, we think about Matthew 18 and excommunicating somebody. But that's the very last steps when it becomes all formalized. Church discipline is the entire process of just forming and shaping people into the fullness of Christ, following him faithfully. And so somebody's telling an off-color story and somebody else says, dude, we don't need to hear that. That's church discipline. And so I think church discipline happens at a very organic, natural level. And that's what we should be thinking about, I think maybe synodically, that we just discipline each other. It means we are holding each other accountable. And when somebody is kind of off the rails, we pull them back in. Why are you doing that? What's going on here? Bring them back in. And we're willing to talk about that. And that means also when something's really out of whack, it's not just a matter of what do the bylaws stipulate, what's this process, but maybe we just go and talk to them and say, what's going on here?
Mm-hmm.
And when some guy's really messing up, whether it's something clear-cut, a pornography problem or some kind of violation of a felony kind of issue, well, there are things we do immediately because we're the church. We need to function like the church. We do that as a congregation. We should do that at circuit level, at district level, at synodical level. We need to function like a church, that we care about each other. We care about God's truth. We care about holding each other accountable to the way that we follow Christ together. And there's a mutuality that comes into play here. And it doesn't matter what the bylaws say. What matters is what we are doing to hold each other accountable in ways that honor Christ and help the church to be what the church should be. And if somebody is struggling with that, we need to be willing to say, hey, you can't be doing what you're doing. This is out of line. You're not part of things. And no matter what the process is, we need to just kind of declare that and make that real clear that this needs to be dealt with now because this is not faithful.
Mm-hmm. And that happens so much easier when there's conversations that have taken
That's
place.
Exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
We know each other. We've talked. We treat each other as brothers, and we assume the best until we can't.
Yeah. I'm always calibrating on things because I've got a lot of good voices in my circles that are like why are you doing that thing or whatnot. That's or even right. With like Memento, like we didn't have massive pivots or anything like that, but there was just good feedback from professors and stuff that we talked about. That's like, well, if you phrase this thing in this way, like that's going to be right in line with the confession, so that it can't be taken out of line. It's like perfect. Let's pivot that.
That's right.
I mean, the one thing we didn't put almsgiving in, and so someone brought up like, well, Jesus, there's 3 things that's brought up on Ash Wednesday. And part of that was we didn't want to have like that built into the formal disciplines of like do this because most of those are like checkbox, like I'm going to try to wake up at the same time or I'm going to fast in this way. And it's a little bit more tougher to be like you're going to give 5%, you're going to get whatever.
Yeah.
But then we did build it real into like the devotions and things like that, kind of mid-tier to say, especially on Ash Wednesday. So point being, right, like people give feedback and you're continually calibrating.
You got to be
because the person and you're like, thank you, Jeff. Like that's really good feedback. I know where you're coming from.
That's right.
You're a good guy.
This is the mutual accountability, and where none of us should assume that we've got it all figured out. As much as I might think I've got everything all figured out and I like what I think, we need to have the accountability, check ourselves against others. That's exactly right.
So, what do you think about the one other thing that I think gains on the theological realm some discussion, and then there's kind of ripple effects from this understanding that gets into things even that we've just talked about. But how do you understand the relationship between the universal priesthood of believers and then the office of public ministry as we understand in our confession?
Yeah, this is something I've spent a fair amount of time thinking about and teaching about. Back in the 80s, one of my professors, Norman Nagel, I mentioned him before, wrote an essay, a little article for Concordia Journal, and it's on the office of the ministry. And this is when a time when there was a strong pull to everyone to minister. All the church growth stuff was kind of just going full blast, and that's a time period in the church's history and not everybody's happy to remember. But he was writing, trying to re-elevate the office of the ministry, and he does a really nice job in the essay. But for me, it's kind of really simple, and it's not that complicated because to whom does Christ give the keys? And I think it's clear in Scripture, and I know people will debate this, but I think it's clear. He gives the keys to the church. And so the church has that. So the church is made up of people and pastors. So are there royal priests who have the keys, which that means they have the ability to go out and proclaim the gospel and to forgive sins? I believe that's absolutely the case. And does Christ give those keys also to the pastor? Absolutely. The pastor has those keys, and that's his particular call. And the reason the pastor has them, that's AC5, because the gospel from AC4 needs to be delivered. So justification by grace through faith in Christ alone, AC4, how's that delivered? Pastoral office. And to me, AC5 is so obviously pastoral office, you really can't debate it. I know people do, and people want to say, well, that's ministry in general. If you read the confessions, it's so obvious. They're talking about what the pastors do. And so it works this way. God wants his gospel delivered to his people. And what's the pastor there to do? Deliver the gospel. He's absolution man. That's why he's there. And so he has this peculiar vocation that's what it's all about. Now, Luther is quite willing to say that's not all he does, because in like his Psalm 82 commentary, he talks about, and he trains people in their vocations, helps people be good children, and helps families to thrive and prosper, and so communities prosper. That's there too. So the training in righteousness is also part of the pastor's job. But task number one is, I'm here to deliver the gospel. And this is one of the beautiful things about Lutheranism, is the locatedness of the gospel. You know where to find it. You don't go in the closet and go down on your knees and pray and hope you feel it in your heart. No, you go where the man is going to say, I forgive you. Thus saith the Lord. And you hear it and you know it. This is the man God put there to tell me I've got it. And that's pretty cool. So the pastoral office has that unique vocation. But now, what about all these royal priests? Well, they've got countless vocations: mother, father, friend, electrician, doctor. In those vocations, they serve their neighbor by doing their vocations well, but they also have a responsibility to bring God's truth into those vocations in appropriate ways at the right time. So when the child sins against the mother and the mother says, I forgive you, Johnny, and so does Jesus. Wait, can she say that? Mm-hmm. Absolutely she can, because she's a royal priest and she can assure her child that not only do I forgive you, Jesus does too. She can do that. She doesn't have to haul him off to the pastor to have him pronounce the absolution over him. She's got that ability in her vocation. And then when the barista is talking to her co-worker and the co-worker says, you go to church and I see you got your life kind of together. My life's a mess. What's going on? What's this all about? Can she share the gospel with her? Absolutely. And in fact, she's the best one to do it because she's got the friendship. For that girl to say, I'll get my pastor, he'll come and tell you. She's like, no chance. I'm not talking to him. Mm-hmm. But you see, the vocation gives you the opportunity and the keys give you the authority. And so the vocations are different. A royal priest has different vocations than a pastor. They don't have the pastor's vocation. So when the mother forgives her child, she's not stepping into the pastoral office for a brief moment. She's just being a mother doing her vocation as a royal priest. And that's a beautiful thing. Mm-hmm. But the pastor, he's got this unique role. He's the public spokesman. He declares it, and people say, he's the guy God put there. He's the guy wearing the vestments. I can trust that God put him there to tell me this absolution. Is it a different forgiveness than my mother gave me at home? Nope, but he just gave it to me too. Cool, now I've got it twice. All the better. And so you see, they're not in competition. And Nagel likes to use this very vivid imagery. He says it's like a nostril, a nose with two nostrils. You've got the priesthood and you've got the pastor. Breathe through both and things are good. If you're only doing one, you got problems. This is exactly right. There's not a competition. And it's also a fallacy, I would argue, to say that, well, the pastor derives from the priesthood. That's not scriptural. That's not even confessional. The pastor gets his authority from Christ. The means might be the congregation putting him in the office, but his authority comes from Christ. And the priesthood does not derive its authority from the pastoral office like in a kind of a Catholic hierarchy kind of trickle-down thing. No, they have their authority straight from Christ as well. And so when I share the gospel with a friend, it's because Christ told me to do that. But because I have that authority, can I stand up and start preaching on Sunday morning? No, I've not been called to do that. Sit down, be quiet. Mm-hmm. And it's my turn to do the Lord's Supper this week. No, you've not been called to do that. Sit down. I'll take care of this. The pastor does what he's been called to do, and the royal priest do what they've been called to do. We all stay in our vocations and do our thing. It's a beautiful thing. There's no competition here.
Well said. That was good. I don't have any follow-up questions. So this one's kind of interesting, and we talked about this a little bit. Talked about the article. That there one of our friends kind of wrote an article, and part of his idea was the questioning the role of synod president, and kind of wondering what's the percentage of CTO, chief theological officer, and then CEO, chief executive officer. And I think part of his concern is if the presidential role becomes mostly just CEO, then what we lose is perhaps the biggest mandate or the most important role for that synod president, which is the chief theological officer, to make sure that we're aligned on these things, to make sure that we have theological unity and stuff. So what's kind of your take on those two hats that the presidential role currently has, and how do we deal with that?
Yeah.
And how would you deal with this going in?
That's a fair observation. I'll be upfront, and this is not a surprise to anybody. My administration experience synodically is minimal. I've not been a synodical bureaucrat. I've not done synodical administration. And so my administration experience has been being a pastor in a congregation and overseeing all that, which I think gives you a fair sense of just working with people. Because I think administration is knowing what people to tap for what jobs and holding them accountable in appropriate ways. That to me is good administration, and being responsible for it all and making sure it's happening. But I do know a lot about theology, and I thought a lot about theology. That's kind of my world. And so I love the idea that the synodical president is to be a theologian teaching his the church and leading the church in ways that are appropriate. I love to teach, and I love this sense of being able to bring God's theology to people in ways that are compelling and interesting and relevant. Because to me, there's nothing irrelevant about God's theology or doctrine. It's all compelling because it all applies to real life. So I think a synodical president really focusing on theology first, foremost, all the way through everything. It should guide everything we do. That's what I was trying to get at earlier, too. The Synod needs to act like a church. Yes, we have business stuff. We're a corporation, and we have to do all that kind of stuff. But, man, we should be doing it like the church. We should look like the church. We should not look like one more worldly institution. We should not look like a lobbying organization. We should not look like people trying to get our way. We should not look like people fighting in the courts like everybody else does. We shouldn't look like that. We need to look like the church. We are different. We follow Christ. And so that means theology needs to drive everything we do. And we need to be tuned into the theological purposes behind what we're doing. And the theology needs to be shaping how we even structure things, what our business things are. Is that a appropriate business practice just because it works in the business world? What's it doing theologically? What's the theological thinking behind it? Is it consistent theologically? And I think the idea of having a synodical president focused primarily on theology and what that means in the church and helping others to zero in on that is exactly right. I like that a lot.
What kind of power, I don't know if power is the right word, but at least like influence does that president have on setting theological tones in the church?
I think he has a lot of influence. It just, in my tenure in the church, I've seen it. Every leader tends to shape the people underneath them. You look at congregations, work the same way. The pastor gets into a congregation, and usually we say it takes about 7 years, but after that time, they definitely take on his flavor, his way of doing things, his approach. They learn to trust him. Where he leads them, they will follow. And so leadership matters a lot. We know this. And it doesn't just matter because they have the rules or the bylaws allow them the authority. It matters because of his style, his way of thinking, his emphases trickle down all over the place. People follow these things. People realize this is what we're doing now. This is how we're going to do it. It matters a lot.
So with the kind of that CTO, CEO, so how do you think, and this is hypothetical because obviously you're not in this role, but like how when you step in, do you form the way you spend your time and the things that you do to kind of keep you in that theological realm? And it's not 100 and it's 0, right? But with the concern of, what happens if you're all of a sudden I'm at 80-20, just kind of executive, kind of worldly, dealing with, lawsuits and things like that. Like, how do you structure things? How do you bring people in order to ensure that?
Yeah, that's a fair question. To me, it's hard to even wrap my mind around that. I've thought theologically for so long, and it's what I do. I mean, in the classroom, I've got my academic stuff to deal with, but it's all about theology, always, all the time. And I can't imagine living any other way. I just can't. I don't know how I would not do that. And so I think keeping the balance is a matter of saying, what am I here to do? I'm a pastor who is serving in this role, not because it's my choice or I've sought it out, but I've been put in this role. So I'm a pastor who wants to care for all these other pastors who are also trying to be faithful men and are giving them themselves so much. What can I do to help them, to encourage them? And so I just need to stay in touch with who I am and what I'm doing there. And well, frankly, my wife is good at this. She is good at reminding me of who I am and what I'm here for.
Yeah.
And I think keeping people around me who will remind me of that is also helpful. And I'm not too concerned about losing that focus, I guess.
Yeah, that's part of your DNA. That's who you are.
It very much is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a quick pause. I've got maybe one more question here, and then we'll get into the administrative components.
Sure.
All right, Bennett says we're back.
All right.
So One other aspect kind of in this area, and this is maybe a bridge between the theological and the administrative as well, but just there's been there's been articles written. We've had some conversations even on this podcast, about this topic, but in the Lutheran history, we do have a history of splits.
Yeah.
Right. So, biggest one, of course, with the walkout, and such, but there's been talks and concerns about, whether or not something like that would happen in the Synod today. And so my question is, one, what's your thoughts on something like a split taking place? And then second, from the pastoral or from the presidential office, what kind of things, and with the ripple effect from there, what kind of things can we do to not have that happen and while having us walk together?
Yeah. Splits are bad. Some people almost relish them and kind of embrace them like this is a good thing. It's not a good thing. Christ wants there to be one church, and that's hopelessly unrealistic. Maybe, but this is still what we should be striving for. We have one faith, one confession, and what we want is everybody confessing the faith faithfully, like God has led us to do. And now it always sounds arrogant, like, we're the only ones who are right. But no, we believe we're faithfully following what Christ has given the apostolic teaching. That's what we're doing. So we shouldn't be ashamed of that. We should be encouraging others to do the same. But splits mean we're not holding together, and unity matters. I was really struck a few years ago when I spent some serious time working through, thinking about what Paul is teaching in Romans and doing, and how much unity matters to him. He's willing to give up his Christian freedom, which you could argue is an issue of doctrine. And he's willing to let that slide for the sake of unity, to put up with a weaker brother. And you could say, well, he's compromising Christian truth by, letting it be believed that somehow you can't eat this meat sacrificed to idols. But Paul is willing to say, I'll do it for the sake of the weaker brother. That's really kind of struck me the more I thought about this, that what Paul is willing to give up even what looks like doctrinally for the sake of unity. That's significant, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. So unity is a high premium. We should value it. We should strive for it. We should work for it. And we should be so heartbroken by anything that breaks it and divides it. So another split in our church body would be a bad thing, just a bad thing. So that means we have to learn to put up with each other? Yeah. Forbearance. I did a video on that not long ago. Forbearance and forgiving. Forbearance means putting up with weird people. Forbearance means putting up with people who bother you, annoy you, and bug you. And it doesn't matter if you like them. I don't like a lot of people. That might be the case, but it doesn't matter. Forbearance means they are brothers. I love them. We work this out. And so we need to have that same attitude in the Synod. When somebody's not doing something that we think is on the right track, we need to figure out why, what's going on, talk with them, and maybe forbear if it's not an issue of Synod. Doctrine is really at stake here, or the practice is completely aberrant. Some practices, need to be reined in. They need to be said, no, this is not appropriate because you're pushing against the doctrinal confession. You're causing confusion. It's not appropriate. That needs to be said. And so we need to be willing to do that. But we also need to be willing to forbear and put up with things. So we should be doing everything we can to avoid a split, especially when it's not over the confessions and it's over practice, because that's called being schismatic. And being schismatic is sin, period. And schism by definition is splitting up over personality or over practice, adiaphora. And I'm not talking practice that is doctrinal legs underneath it, but if you're splitting over adiaphora or over personality, that's schismatic. That's sin.
Yeah, it seems like there's the wrestling with what's internal conversation and what's external conversation, right?
What do you mean by the internal, external?
Yes, like the Catholic Church is a good example of like they've got a large bandwidth for what is an internal conversation, right. What is part of that, right? Yeah. In that if you go to South America or you go to Northern Europe or you go to Chicago, those are very different versions of Catholicism, right? But they say this is still part of the Catholic Church and we're going to have these dialogues, right? And it seems like more so the Lutheran tradition has been, we'll have an internal conversation for a little bit, but we're very quick to move it to an external. To say, now you guys go do that thing, and we're going to do your thing. So, and how do you balance that? You know, that's a little bit of tact, but it seems like part of it is how much long suffering are we willing to endure? Right. Do we expect that in a year, everything's in in 5 years? And it seems like Rome's got a little bit, for right or wrong, right? Rome's got a little bit of a longer trajectory. Absolutely. Of saying, it might take 4 generations for us to work through this. Right. But it's better 6 generations, but we're willing to do that. Now, maybe you can go too far on that front for sure, but perhaps we don't have that long suffering.
Well, this is what I see Paul doing. He's long suffering with the church, Christians in Rome. It's putting up with long suffering, and that's the idea. And so, putting up with that patience, but always with having the conversation and holding it in check. But I think Rome is a good example of this. You see, fellowship questions come into play here as well. How much do you have to agree to have fellowship? And this is something that I've said a few different times in different places. I think it's time for us to spend some time thinking about this again. What is the criteria for fellowship? What's fellowship mean? How does this work? What's it mean to be unified in our doctrine and in our common confession? And how does this play out when it starts getting into practices that are seeming to be different? Can we still have fellowship? Because it's wrong when LCMS pastors all get together and there are certain ones who won't commune with others because of their practices.
Yeah.
Something's not right there. That's a loss already, and that should be challenged, and we need to think through what's going on. So what role does a synodical president have in this? He can be the one who says, wait, this is what we're unified around, and we need to stay on track with that and make sure that there's nobody in this church, in the synod, who feels like they don't have a voice or a means to get to the table and have a conversation. And if somebody is frozen out and pushed out of the conversation, that's a problem. And even if I don't like that voice, and if I'm not crazy about how they're doing things, they're still a brother in Christ, and I need to treat them that way. And I need to treat them as a fellow, one part of my confession. I need to treat him that way until there's some reason why I can't. But we're in unity, and we need to act like that and give everybody a chance to have a voice and be part of the conversation.
Yeah.
Those people who come into the conversation might not like where we all come out on this, but they're part of it then. And they can own it. But if they're not even part of it, then they have a legitimate voice to say, wait, I wasn't even consulted here. Fair enough. And that's not right. Mm-hmm. They need to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. I'm young. I'm 35. And I'm, even regardless of my age, I'm hopelessly optimistic in general.
A good thing.
But it drives my wife crazy sometimes. But I don't know. I really do think that it is not as difficult as it seems to win over a brother. It just, you build the relationship, you find those connection points. And I think you can have those types of tough conversations. And I've been won over on things, and I've watched other people be won over on things, but it seems like if you can create a proper culture where that takes place, like you said, like we can, it's the whole Abraham Lincoln thing, right? Like he hires his opponents to be part of his cabinet.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to keep them close, and they're going to be part of the discussions. And in the end, he's got the decision-making skill, right? He can say, I still do disagree. And no, we're not, whatever, doing this economic policy. But that is something that could have a ripple effect change.
I think that's exactly the right attitude. And I'm maybe naive or optimistic enough to think also sitting down, having the heart-to-heart conversation and treating him like a brother is always the right way to start. Will it always bring a good outcome? Not necessarily, but it's always the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely always the right thing. So I'll be optimistic that way too.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think a split would be devastating. Right on the, if you take serious, which I do, the data of saying people are actually starting to take Christianity much more seriously here in America, young people especially. It just seems like if we were to have a split on the front doorstep of that, I think Satan would be having a little party.
I couldn't agree more. It's and it gets back to the witness we're giving to the world. Let's never forget. I haven't said this enough even today in our conversation, that the church is here for the sake of the world. We're not here to self-sustain. We're not here to take care of ourselves. We're not a little in-group to make sure we can fight off the bad world out there. That's not what we're about. We are about witnessing to that world. We take God's truth to that world. We're not afraid of it. Christ is our Lord. He's going to take care of us. We take that message to the world with confidence. And so our evangelistic outlook needs to be driving everything we do, because we have this confessional standard. We know where we're at. What's the point? So that people out there who are not in God's church become part of God's church. And a split would be devastating for that.
Yeah. So let's move to the administrative here. We'll do this one first, and the next one's going to be probably a pretty big talking point, because it's a very big public talking point. But for this one, this would be kind of just pointed on, as you mentioned, administrative experience is not your strongest suit. Theological experience is your strongest suit. Right. So everyone's going to come in with different experiences and whatnot. But one thing certainly that would fall into this kind of administrative role that the Synod president would have to step into is, let's say that a district president were found to be teaching or tolerating teaching and activities which deviate materially from Scripture. What is some of those specific procedural paths that you could follow? And the reason, by the way, for this question of district president is because if Trinity Lutheran Church here in Waconia does something obnoxious, right? It's perhaps you'll have communication, but the way it would work is that's the district thing, and you might be involved with that. So let's say that the district president refuses to step in on something like that, or he himself is even endorsing that. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, that's going to be a heart-to-heart conversation with me and the district president for sure, if I was a synodical president. So synodical president, district president should be having serious conversations, and not just about what's the procedure, what what do we have to do, but what's best for the church, what's best for the wider church, what's your responsibility to the wider church body you're part of. And I think sometimes we become way too insular, and we start looking at our little fiefdoms. Well, in my district, this is what we do. So who cares about just your district? You're part of the church, the whole thing. And you might have the Constitution on your side, but do you have the church on your side? Are you functioning in a way that's actually honoring Christ? And so when I see a congregation, if a congregation was deviating from right practice in their doctrine or their practice, something's wrong, then obviously you would talk with the right people. The district president, circuit visitor needs to have those conversations and get those people involved. And if you're getting the same kind of attitude from them, that's a big problem, obviously. And that would be a topic for heart-to-heart conversation, and it would be a topic to bring up with the COP. And I would need definitely to be educated about what all the bylaw room, how this works, what do you do? But it would be something that would bother me tremendously. And I'm not going to be able to just say, oh, we'll let that slide. No, it doesn't slide. This is a blight on the work of the church. And this is a blight on who we are as the church and the witness we're giving. Back to witness again. And see, witness doesn't just mean we all just act like everything's fine and we just roll along in a peaceful, kind of bland thing.
Kumbaya.
Yeah. The being together in unity means it's hard fought. We work it through. It's not always simple. Sometimes we have disagreements, but man, we need to hold each other accountable. That's what it means to be church. And that's what it means to give a witness to the churches. This is what it means to follow Christ. Sometimes it's hard. Sometimes we have to hold each other accountable. Sometimes we have to say, what you're doing is wrong. Stop it. And we've got to be able to say that. And whether the bylaws allow you to do that, it needs to be done anyway. Mm-hmm. It drove me crazy a few years ago. There was a contention going on between a district official and a seminary professor, and they needed to talk. But the word that came down was that there was a reluctance to talk because it wasn't allowed in the bylaws because of something was going on in the process. That they couldn't talk with each other right now because the bylaws forbid it. I heard that and I just couldn't believe it. It just blew me away that you would actually invoke bylaws over actually Matthew 18.
Matthew 18, yeah.
Yeah. And so the sense of let's be the church and let's act like the church. And that means an accountability to each other, but it also means patience with each other. And if the guy says, you go to the DP and says, I'm working on it, here's what's going on, there's all these other things you weren't aware of, this is what's happening, okay. And then maybe we have figured out what's the unified voice message we tell to the church then, so the church can trust us to know that we're working on it. But there needs to be some concrete evidence that we're working on it too. That doesn't just kind of get brushed away for 19 months or a year and a half. We keep on working at things, and the church sees it happening in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So this next one's going to be a pretty big one. We can spend some time here.
Okay.
Right. And this is one that I think we haven't talked about this before. Just maybe dabbled last night, but so I'm interested because you're a seminary professor of 23 years. Is that right? 20.
23. Yeah.
Yeah.
24.
Yeah. So one of the biggest conversations, right, that's happening out there is pastoral formation.
Yep.
Right. And there's the seminary. In-person seminary, and there's various things and roles that take place there, right, for students. There is SMP, there's other more alternative conversations that have kind of entered the discussion. Right. So what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, seminary formation matters a lot to me. I'm very involved in it. I teach residential courses, obviously. I teach SMP courses, and I've taught a lot of them. I even taught a few Delta courses way back when.
What was Delta?
Delta was distance education leading toward ordination. And it was actually, and I did had to do this where we actually would fly a little circuit. And I remember flying to Milwaukee and then Minneapolis, I think, and, like 5 different places, all in a course of about a week. And I would do this intense teaching face-to-face with a group of guys who got together. And these were guys who were not ordained, but they were working through a training program to get ordained. And this was before S&P, and this is before anything. So this was been around. We've been experimenting with this stuff and toying with this stuff for a long time. S&P is not a new thing. It's a new solution or new way, but we've always recognized the need for this. So this is a hot topic, and I guess the short answer is residential is a great way to form people because you're face-to-face. I love teaching face-to-face. I'll just be honest. I do not like teaching online. I hate it. I hate the screen. I don't like I hate the lack of body language. I don't like the failure to interact. I want to be able to hear my guys laugh. I want to get the sense, the tone of the classroom. You don't get that, with the screen. So, but can I do it? Yeah. And is it better than, asynchronous learning? Oh, infinitely better than asynchronous.
Yeah.
What's that? Correspondence course. And so, watching a lecture, what's that? That's just watching YouTube videos. So what? But the online is not as good as face-to-face, obviously. But can we always make the face-to-face happen? Well, we can't always. And we do have new technologies. And even residential education has changed so much in the last, go way back to when we used to have the system where you had guys who were pegged in 8th grade, you're going to be a pastor someday. And so you went from your Lutheran parochial school off to one of the boarding schools and you became a Johnny and you went to St. John's and you lived. And this is through high school, the gymnasium, and you're learning Latin and German. And then a little further on, you start learning Greek and Hebrew. And then we had the senior college, which kind of was a new thing that came in as part of the system. And then finally you went to the seminary. And if you're going to the system, that means St. Louis because you're doing the whole thing. And you came to the seminary with Latin and with German and with Greek and with Hebrew. And then you started the seminary.
Wow.
Yeah. We're not even close to that. We're so far from that. And so the residential education now, it's still good. And I do it. But it's even changed in the 25 years I've been doing this stuff and being involved in it. It keeps on shifting. Now guys come in and we assume no languages. And that's where we start. And the language acquisition is part of it. And so if we're going to make that part of the seminary program, what gets cut? Things get cut. And nobody likes to talk about it, but you've got to pull stuff back somewhere. And then when congregations demand, our guys don't know how to preach, we need to spend more time there. Okay, so where are we going to pull back on to make that happen? I've sat through department meetings and through faculty meetings where departments are exegetical and systematics and historical and practical are all vying for credit hours, giving up credits and who gets what, because we all want a piece of this. And we all think we're the most important, but we know we are. Systematics matters the most. And so things are always in flux, and we need to recognize that. And this idea of the residential is the perfect. Wow, it's a good thing, but SMP is also not a bad thing. And there are elements that are going on in both anyway. We are doing stuff online, even residential. Guys are watching videos as part of their training. We do that. We assign that kind of stuff. It's part of it. It's not like, oh, you're doing that? Well, of course. These are the technology we have available. We take advantage of it. And if you can have somebody watch a lecture that's well done, then we come to class and discuss it, that makes sense. So there's already a mixture going on. So I think it's probably time, again, maybe to sit down and have a really big synod-wide conversation. Maybe we need to get a task force together or a blue ribbon committee, whatever those are. I've heard that term kicked around before.
Yeah.
And we get some of the key players who know what's going on, seminary people and CUS people and pastors and people who are invested in this. And we get them together and we give them the task of, let's look at what are the needs of the world, the opportunity where we are right now in the world with the situation with nihilism, with people having this interest and the church having a need to proclaim to that world. What's the world's need? What does the church's need? What kind of pastors should we be forming? What should they be equipped to do? What's it going to take to get that done? And we should start thinking about everything. What is the curriculum that should guide us? What are the absolute things that should be happening? Are we doing things because we've done it that way for 100 years? Are we trying to go back and repristinate something? Oh, that was so good when we used to do it that way. We should make them do it that way again. There are tools now that we didn't have when I was going through it. This thing called Logos, where, you can have your Nestle Island 28 up on your screen, and you just slide the mouse over a word, and it parses it for you. Bam, right there. Mm-hmm. Click on it twice. It takes you to Bauer and Gingrich. It's all right there. It's so fast. And it's such an awesome tool. These things were not available when I was going through. Translating 10 verses would take you forever. You got to pulling books off shelves, looking stuff up, flipping pages. Now it's just bang, bang, bang. Everything's changed. And we need to pay attention to that. So we should maybe get a group of guys together, people together, and say, what are the outcomes? What's a pastor? What should he look like? What should he have? What are the tools he needs? Now, what's it going to take to get there? How can we make that happen? And are there different levels? And there always have been. There are guys, there were always the St. Louis guys, and there were always the Springfield guys. Then it became the Fort Wayne guys. And the Fort Wayne guys, or the Springfield guys, like my dad. He was a vet. He came out of Korea, came home, goofed around on the farm for a while, said, I should be a pastor. So he went to Springfield. He didn't have Greek. He didn't have Hebrew. Learned a little Greek at the Springfield, enough to get through, and never did any Hebrew. And he went out and was a pastor. He didn't have a degree. He was non-degree. He had a certificate. And did he serve well as a pastor? I think he did. And I can run people by you who say, yes, he served really faithfully. Mm-hmm. I'm biased. I'm his kid. So that's how we did it. And so there were two very different tracks. We've always had this. And so we need to think about, what do those tracks look like when we have the option for non-residential? How does that work? How do we do the hybrid things? And probably the truth is going to be blendings always. Right now, even SMPs are spending 4 weeks a year on campus together. And that's not insignificant. So it's time, I think, to think hard about, what do we want pastors to look like and why? How do we get them there the best way? What does the seminary training look like? How many seminaries do we need? 2, 3, 4? Do we need some remote all over the geographically? Can we get by with one? What do we need? What's the right thing? How many CUS schools do we need to disciple kids, young people, to become faithful servants in the church and different things? How many do we need? What are we trying to do with our CUS schools? That should be part of the discussion. Mm-hmm. Are we here to provide a good, robust liberal arts education with little Jesus thrown in and look, it's Jesus? Or are we here to make disciples who follow Christ? Very different things. This goes down even to grade schools, but that's not part of the discussion today. Mm-hmm. But what are we trying to do here with this education? Are we making followers of Christ, or are we just making people who are successful in the business world who've got a little smattering of Jesus thrown in? They're different things. Discipleship formation is a very different way of operating. You know this from your work getting Memento set up. Mm-hmm. Making disciples, forming, is a different way of operating than just giving people knowledge so they can go be successful in some endeavor. So if we think hard about what the pastor should look like, what we're trying to produce, what does it take to get there, then maybe we can start to come into some solid conclusions of, we can use these tools, we can use these tools. This might be a good track. Maybe this is a better track. Now that's long term. That's like maybe 10 years down the road after we do all this work, think stuff through, we finally come to conclusions, here's what we should do. And it'll probably take at least that long. Probably a good 5 years just to get through all the kind of meetings, thinking things through, dumping everything on the table, having an honest talk about, what are we trying to accomplish here and why? Mm-hmm. What does it mean to be a faithful pastor? Why do we think this? What does Scripture teach us? What does our heritage give us? What does it mean to be faithful? Let's get this figured out. And let's figure out now how we can make this happen. How do we form and shape these guys to be really faithful pastors? I want faithful pastors. I want them for my kids, for my grandkids. I don't want people being boneheaded pastors. And so, but what's it going to take to get them there? And then we have that discussion and we start implementing it. This is a long-term process. And who knows what survives? But I would be really confident that we're going to make men capable of doing what the church needs. And it doesn't necessarily mean MDiv or the academics. That's a piece of it. But it doesn't mean it's all online. We're going to use all the technology. Technology is not a panacea. What makes me men pastors is them getting formed to be followers of Christ faithfully in their own lives. And there are lots of ways of doing that. Let's talk about it.
That's good. And it seems like one good consequence of that is if we're able to put energy together to come up with a solution, one, you can say, let's all calm down on this front, right? Because it certainly has gotten heated, and it seems like it's gotten heated very quickly.
It has.
Too. It's like I've been aware of this discussion publicly for like 3 years,
yeah,
and maybe last like 2 years it's heated up, and it seems like some people are ready to throw in the towel. And
yeah,
my take is this has been 3 years.
I know,
and maybe it goes back further or whatnot from behind the scenes, but this is not a 40-year drag out fight, But like, let's calm down, let's work together, let's come to a conclusion, and then let's rally around that conclusion and try to implement it.
And the conclusion, no one's going to love it. And no one's going to love it completely.
Yeah.
I hate that part. Everyone's going to hate something about it. But this is how the church works, for crying out loud.
Mm-hmm.
We all have to bite the bullet and deal with things and put up with each other, forbearance, and then we're going to do this. And yes, we're going to rally around. This is our conclusion. We're not going to split over it. We're not going to take our ball and go home. We're not going to circle the wagons and fight for our own way and shut you out because, well, we got the votes. So what? If we leave out 30% because we've got the votes, what have we accomplished? Mm-hmm. That's not a win for anybody. That's a loss.
Yeah.
And so we all work together. We compromise, and we're not compromising the gospel. We're not compromising doctrine. We're compromising our favorite pet things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a difference between residential education and the gospel. And part of the reason I think as the rhetoric is heated up so quickly is I've heard floated around actually the idea that, well, online education breeds confessional laxity. Blew my mind. I heard this. And, give me the data. Back it up. Prove that. Don't give me these analogical, these allegorical things or these anecdotal things. Back it up.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think part of that mentality is there that, we're losing our church because we're losing the education. And education matters. Don't get me wrong. I'm totally invested. Formation is the key. Formation in my kids, my grandkids, my students. It's all about formation. But there are lots of ways to get this done faithfully. And when we start to lock down that somehow, that formation is going to make people who are confessionally lax, where did that come from?
Mm-hmm.
That just makes everybody get more fired up. One of the problems we have in the church, this is just much wider, but it's always true, and I've written about this, is that we have this huge problem of we feel like eternity is at stake because it is. And we ever get all ramped up. And so as soon as you play the gospel's at stake card, it's like all bets are off now because now the gospel's at stake. Now I can slander and I can cheat. I can do whatever it takes because the gospel's at stake. Well, no, you don't get to break all the rules just because you've now invoked the gospel's at stake card. We need to be a little more careful. And that's what you're saying. Calm down here. Maybe the gospel is at stake because it always is, but is it really being threatened? Are these people actually advocating false doctrine that's going to send people to hell? Let's back off here a little bit. Let's make sure we get our thinking square and we're all working together. And now we come to our right conclusions about where we're going.
Mm-hmm. So let's do some specifics kind of within this realm. So one idea with the SMP, right, is that the way that it's set up, I think most people would say that I've talked to, that SMP, the way that it's set up, serves a very valuable purpose for the church. For instance, you've got a church or two churches in New Mexico, not a big population. We want to serve those people. They do not have the money to call a pastor out of SEM or somewhere else to move with their family out to the middle of New Mexico. So what can we do in this situation? Like, let's find a way to rise somebody up there, and to get them so that they can serve that congregation, right? And there's a couple other adjacent examples of that. Now, one of the concerns that's often voiced around the SMP is that it's set up for that purpose, but then sometimes what you get is maybe two things. One, people that very much could go to seminary, right? Like they could go to St. Louis, they could go to Fort Wayne, right. But it's easier to hang out with your friends in the community that you've grown up with. Keep your job that's kind of nice. Do this SMP, get 1/3 of the coursework, with some additional training at there. But I'm not going to do this because water runs downhill, right? So now there's an easier option. So people take advantage of that when that's not really what it was built for. I'll pause there, then I'll give the second one so you can maybe speak to that.
Yeah, and so that's a concern, obviously, and that's why you always have rules to try to direct that kind of a thing. My response typically is I think what rather than trying to protect the residential by curtailing and circumscribing the reach of SMP, is you just make the residential really robust and really attractive, so that people say, why would I not want this? This is the right thing. And I think we can do this. I think we already have this, but I think we should be championing that. And we should be spending even more time making sure that our residential experience is so attractive and so thoroughly formative in positive ways that people know that's what they want. We have had people who have done SMP and they come to the SEM and they become residential students. I've got a couple right now who are doing that. And so it happens. And I think we should be making the residential so attractive that it happens more and more and more. That it's not a matter of we have to protect the residential by clamping down on the SMP. To me, that's the wrong solution. The better solution is to bump up the residential and make it really robust and really attractive that people say, yeah, of course I want that. And if I can't, and here's the compelling reasons, and yes, we can set up our criteria for that, but the criteria should be somewhat flexible and pretty generous, I think, letting people to do that, because I've known people also who are being cut out of that because they're not meeting some of the criteria, and there are prime candidates for it.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah. Coach Bennett, remind me to bring up Navy SEALs. Don't let me forget. Because I think that's a topic I want to talk to you on this one as well. But what was the other one? Now I'm all caught up on Navy SEALs. Oh yeah. So what's your thoughts on this? I've heard some notions that I don't know the history of this quite so much, but it makes sense to me. I've heard arguments that we don't have a place for this theologically, but I don't know. I think I'm still attracted to this, to where I'm okay with there are levels of pastors, and you can use deacons or whatever terminology you want to use. I'm fine with, but I'm okay with that, in that that's how it works in the other realm. Like, I can go to the doctor's office, and there's some things a nurse practitioner, can deal with.
Yep.
And there's sometimes where I need someone who is an MD for a situation. And there's some times where I want someone who has even more letters behind their name, right? So, and I naturally think that way. Like, when I run into someone who has a doctor behind their name, I don't think that we're equal.
Right.
Okay. And I don't mean we're equal humans or anything, right? But like, you went and got a PhD. That is a massive undertaking, and you have done things that I have not done. So I'm completely okay with saying a doctor in the church is something that I am not.
Yeah.
And I'm also okay with saying someone that goes and gets an S&P, right, that you have not had the same training. So I'm okay with that type of hierarchy. But I also think that solves some of it, because I think one of the issues or one of the concerns is, if you have S&P and you have doctor and you have MDiv, and we're all just thrown into the same pool, and we can all just go do all of the exact same things. We can take a call to X, Y, and Z or whatever, which was not the original intention of the S&P. That causes some of the issues that we're fearful of. So what kind of things can we do to say we do have these types of levels? And whatever you want to say, that the terminology is different. People have different opinions there. But what's your thoughts there?
Yeah, well, see, to me, AC 14 is the big driver here, I think, theologically. And so AC 14 is no one should preach or do sacraments without being rightly called, rite vocatus. So if you got a call, you're in. And so to me, the criteria is always, are you in the office or aren't you? And so the problem with lay deacons is you've got someone who's not in the office acting like he is. That's a problem. Violates AC 14. Don't do that. And so that's ruled out. But if you're going to put him in the office, let him go. So if you got a guy in, out in the sticks of Montana, I'll use Montana stuff, New Mexico. Yeah. I like New Mexico. I like Montana too. But if you're out in the sticks of Montana, in the even the flat part, the eastern part, and you're in the middle of nowhere, and you got a little congregation, and you got a guy who's capable, but he's not ordained, and he shouldn't be doing more than a sacrament. So what are you gonna do with him? Can we make him a pastor? And I think there are ways we can think about how we could do that. And can he be ordained and put into the office? Yes. And let him do that. No, don't let him say, well, you're just a deacon and you can't do this. No, you're now in the office. And so is there a distinction? He's just at the very bottom tier level, just came in, but is he a man who can do the word and sacrament? Yes. Maybe he actually reads sermons that were sent to him because he's not capable of writing his own sermons yet. Why is anybody going to complain about that? I'd be willing to bet that congregation say, well, take it. He's reading a sermon that's cranked out by some guy who knows what he's doing at the SEM. We'll be happy to have him here reading it and have him leading us in the Lord's Supper. And he can practice church discipline because he knows how to do that. He knows when we're out of line. He knows he can do that. And so, perfect. Can he be in the office of the ministry and serve in that place? You bet. And that's not a problem. And he's in the same office as the synodical president or as a seminary professor. Same office, the office of the holy ministry. But the distinctions, what they're doing are hugely different. And is anybody going to call him to be the seminary professor? No, he's not going to meet the criteria. And what did the congregation call him? Well, he's a pastor. We can call him. But wait a minute. What's his training? They're going to do a little bit of research. They'll find out really quickly. That's why we have districts and circuits. Oh, he's not really an appropriate fit here. In a sense, it sounds like a business word, but the market will sort itself out. We will find out who is the right guy here to serve. And if a congregation says, we think he's just going to be just fine here, and we trust that, then okay, what's the problem with that? Why are we going to say, wait, no, if it doesn't meet some kind of rule, why are we so worried about that? The better thing is Is he in the office? And if he's in the office, is he equipped to be in the office? What are the criteria scripturally? Husband of one wife, able to teach, not given to, much wine, whatever, not a new convert. Is he meeting those criteria? Yep. He's in the office. Doesn't have an MDiv. Doesn't have a BA. Oh no. What's the big deal?
Mm-hmm.
Can he do it?
Yeah. So that gets to maybe a follow-up question on that one. So we'll wait on the Navy SEALs. We'll tail over to another one because, and the question is going to be, and I'll frame this up with another situation, the second situation I was going to bring up way back when, the question is, what kind of guardrails do we need on something like that? Because there is the market force that's going to work in some cases, but in some cases it might not, and that might create ripple effect. And so here's kind of the other example, if that's okay. Is one of the other concerns that's been voiced about SMP is that there are churches, usually large churches, right, that their approach and their preference is rather than playing ball with the synod, rather than playing ball with the seminaries, we're going to train 6, 7, 8 SMP people to come up within our congregation. Our church has 2,300 members, something like that. Yeah, we have 2 full-time pastors and a retired guy that helps. I don't know why you need 6 SMP. That's just anecdotal on me, but they train that up, right? So now you've got a large number of SMP stepping in through this one congregation, which means that they're being trained in accord with that congregation. Not exclusively, because as you said, they're going to show up at St. Louis and whatnot, but they're certainly going to have a specific flavor.
Absolutely.
That was different from my own upbringing where, I was at a fieldwork church, I went to a vicarage, I'm around a lot of different people for a handful of years from different perspectives and a vast array of professors. So then you have them, but then you have kind of this circle of churches that will then call those SMP pastors from another one rather than going to the field, right? So in other words, it can at least hypothetically be abused. I think historically it has been abused. I don't know to what degree. I'm not plugged into that degree. But that's kind of where one of those concerns is, to where are there guardrails that we can set up to say, to say we want to uphold SMP. We think this is a valuable thing for all of these specific reasons, but can we stop some of the concerns or the potential abuses so that SMP can not be itself so controversial, but it can shine in the right way? How do we deal with that?
Well, see, the problem is if you've got congregations that start operating that way, it starts becoming a synod within a synod. And they become their own little synod, and they still carry the little blue flying cross kind of a thing, and look when they want to, but they're not really functioning with the whole rest of the synod. And it's not even a matter of your worship style or things; it's just your whole attitude of what are we trying to do here. And I think you're right about people trying to avoid the residential education because they don't want their guys messed up by what the seminary is going to teach them. Well, if that's really your attitude, why are you part of the synod? Because if you're really afraid of getting your guys messed up by what they're going to get at the seminary, then you're really not part of us, because the seminary is part of us. Now, the seminaries obviously can take on flavors based on who's, getting through the pre-approval process and all that kind of a thing, which is not an insignificant issue either. And so that matters, who's in leadership. But the seminaries are who we are. And so if you're trying to avoid that, that's time for a serious conversation. So can we put up guardrails? I'm sure we can. I'm sure we could, creatively come up with, we're going to make this rule that's going to take care of that. It's a little bit like what Nicaea did with Arius. Homoousius, I can't say that. Okay, that's what we're going to use then. That's our guardrail. Homoousius is the guardrail that leaves you out, Arius. Tough. Yeah. And that was why it was done. It was very deliberate. So can we come up with guardrails that will circumvent those things? I'm sure we can. And should we? Probably, because I think that way of operating is disingenuous. It's not, you're not really being part of synod if you're functioning that way. If you're not really willing to send your young men to the seminary and say they belong to the church now, what are you doing? Well, they belong to us. We want them for what we want to do. You don't care about anybody else? What's that? See, there's an attitudinal problem. There's an attitude problem there right off the bat.
Yeah, it almost seems like a non-dedom, and I don't mean even liturgically speaking, but just a non-dedom kind of mentality that can set in. Where it's like, this is our realm, this is our church, and that's really all that I'm really concerned about.
That's exactly right. And he's right. It has nothing to do with your worship style or even your confession. It has to do with your attitude towards who we are and how we function. And I know way too many big churches that operate this. We're just fine. We're taking care of ourselves. And that's why they don't go to circuit stuff. They have minimal district stuff. Why are you even part of stuff anymore? Go be independent. If you're really going to function independently, go do it. We have a responsibility to each other, and we can't just check out. I don't care how big you get or how successful you are, then share what you've got with other people. And that's part of that sharing thing. You know, you got 6 guys who can be pastors. I know all kinds of places who have no guys who can be pastors. What are you doing about that? Well, they don't want to move. Wow. Then are we really caring about the flock? Are we really caring about the church? Or are we just caring about what's convenient for us? Are we following Christ here or aren't we?
Yeah. I remember Bennett.
Navy SEALs.
Navy SEALs.
Right.
So this gets back to, you gestured towards it in a couple different ways, but I think Adam Coons had a speech at this at the ACELC last year, where this topic was being talked about.
Okay.
You know, and he made the point of the fact of Navy SEALs. Like, Navy SEALs don't make a ton of money, right? But tons of guys from around the country are geared towards, they want to be a Navy SEAL.
Okay. Yeah.
Right. So there's this aspect of, and I think it's very built into the masculine spirit of in some ways, the higher the bar is raised and the more that is asked of you, the more you want to strive for that. So that's what he was kind of advocating for in this whole pastoral formation conversation. And I'm remembering, I haven't listened to this in like a year, so if I'm taking it slightly out of context, apologies, Adam. But I am enticed by that idea of, because I think one of the things is I've got a handful of friends that, you know, I went to undergrad for business, right?
Okay.
So I was surrounded by a lot of just very high capacity individuals, just kind of like, they can get things done, they're efficient, they're effective, you know, and now they're off making a lot of money doing other things.
You are.
Yeah, and here I am. You know, but a couple of them were...
You're where God wants you to be, though.
Well, yes.
Cool
yes.
thing.
There's rewards in that. Yeah. But there's a couple of guys I'm like, I think that they would have been pastors if the bar was raised. And maybe financially would have been part of that, right?
Yeah.
Maybe there's a little bit of a fear of, you know, what if I end up in New Mexico with, you know, my wife and we're not in your family? So there's some other aspects there. But really, I think the biggest aspect is if there's this approach to, that's like being a Navy SEAL, the training's like that, like it's hard, it's completely formative, that draws some high potential individuals in. And when you're talking about how it was back in the day, kind of what you were saying, this gold standard, like that's
system.
Yeah, that's 4 languages before you're even getting to seminary. That's pretty wild. And that's not going to change in the next 5 years, of course, or anything. But how do we set something up that entices individuals that this is going to be like Navy SEAL training?
Yeah. And that's part of the making residential education so attractive and so robust that people say, man, I want that. That's what I want, because that's what I need. And I encounter students all the time, and even people who visit campus, this is what I want. I know this is what I want. And so it's there. I'm not saying we need to create it, because it's there. But I think we need to embrace that a little bit more and talk about that a little bit more and elevate that as this is going to expect a lot of you. And it's what Jesus, you know, follow me. And then you have Bonhoeffer's wonderful line. When Christ bids a man come follow me, he bids him come and die. And so we're asking nothing less than everything. That's it. We're asking you to follow Christ. Everything's involved here. This is going to challenge you. It's going to demand of you. And you know this. Every pastor knows this. Doing a good, faithful pastor is not easy. It takes so much out of you. Emotionally, spiritually, physically, it just demands. But it's a blast. Just an absolute blast being a pastor. Yeah. What a joy. What a treat. And so to give that message to young guys and help them realize this is going to be the hardest thing you'll do, but it's going to be a wonderful thing. Yeah. So I'm on board with that idea.
What role do you think spiritual practices play in that?
Big part.
To circle back to what we were talking about before, because I think a lot of young guys are striving towards that. And I even find I've got 4 young kids, and, you know, but sometimes I'm like, man, it'd be really nice to just be at SEM and, like, you know, like have a 3-hour time where I go in and we just chant through all 150 Psalms. Right? And I'm not saying like that's the answer.
I mean, you need more than 3 hours, but you can
might be more than 3. But but, you know, like things like that, I think are some formative things that I think would have been, you know, really nice. We did, in fact, when we were there, we did something where we read through the whole Bible in a week. Okay. So we had someone up there even throughout the night. And I remember I signed up for some of the night shifts, and it was kind of rough, but it was also, I don't have any kids, so like, who cares? I get up at 2 a.m, go in, and I was reading like Isaiah for 3 hours. And I mean, I think I was the only person in the auditorium when we were doing this. But, you know, things like that, I think, are part of that, to where it's not just that intellectual challenge, which is very important, but like a physical type challenge that you embody.
Yeah. And so there's lots of terms for this, spiritual disciplines, but see that for a lot of people that evokes the idea of monks, castrating themselves and all this kind of stuff, and how crazy are we going to get here?
Let's not do that. Yeah,
I know, yeah, exactly. But you get this, and you start getting these ascetics, and they got bonkers. These guys on the desert, these desert fathers, they got goofy.
Yeah,
not good.
Some of them wouldn't eat for Lent.
Right. That's what I'm saying. It gets kind of bonkers.
We're not going to do that.
No, we're not. But see, and so you have to be a little careful here. But whatever you want to call it, is following Christ a whole life thing? Of course. And does it mean learning to control all of myself? Yeah, my passions, my thinking. Yeah, and is there always room for every one of us? Every one of us should be growing in these areas all the time. Learning how to get started on that. Seminary should be paying attention to that. Those formation things. Yeah, I think we should be paying attention to the whole man more than we do, and helping to establish the trajectory, the path that you're going to follow. This is the way I'm going to do this. This is how we do this. I'm getting started. We're not going to produce guys who are done, full, complete. It's not going to, they're in the process. But they're in the process, and we're forming the whole man. Absolutely. That's part of the Navy SEAL thing. So maybe don't make him roll around and become a, sugar cookie or whatever they call them, rolling around in the
sand on the beach.
Yeah. On the beach, wet and rolling in the sand, we don't need to do that, but
maybe a little bit of that.
Yeah. Desert fathers here.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts on the whole pastoral formation that we didn't cover that you?
No, I think that's pretty much what I don't have anything loose ends there.
Okay. So what, this will be kind of concluding question here.
Yeah.
So what would be some top priorities that you would see? Like, let's say, well, I guess the election's before. So, election, convention, or whatever, you step in. What are some things that you've got your list of things that you need to, your things you have to connect with people, all of this, but these are things that you really want to dive into.
Yeah. Well, the first thing is, figuring out what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah.
And learning the job description.
Yeah.
And learning into that. But no, I would say that I would want to spend a lot of time getting to know the leadership in the Synod, who they are, who's in these positions already, and getting to know them really well and building relationships with them. So the Council of Presidents, getting to know all the members there and spending time with them, building relationships, finding out what's driving them. It takes a lot of time, but that's important time because that's part of the building relationships. And then I'd say priorities of things that need to be dealt with is, this pastoral formation is a big priority. That needs to we need to talk about that. Whether the Synod and Convention this summer is going to handle that and settle it all, I have my doubts. I'm not even sure what's going to even make it as far as resolutions, what's going to come to the floor. All that will happen later this month when the floor committees get together and start pounding out the actual, business of the Synod. We'll see what happens and even if it's on the agenda, whether it gets voted, gets settled. I don't know. I'm skeptical of that. So my guess is that's probably going to be an issue still going forward, is really figuring out this pastoral formation, best ways to do this. Dealing with the problems of the shrinking, the small congregations, how are we handling this, and the fact that we have a congregational polity that allows these little congregations to stay open maybe beyond past a reasonable, is it really reasonable to do this? And how are we handling those situations and trying to be careful and kind and considerate, but also being realistic about some of the pragmatic things here, about what's really good use of resources. What is Christ calling us to do? Well, this congregation is built by my father. Yeah, I get that. But what's the situation today? And sorting that out and figuring out how we're dealing with pastors who are dealing with duals, triangulars, 4 congregations sometimes, how we can handle more of that. That needs to be a priority, sorting that out.
Mm-hmm.
And then just bringing theology and doctrine back into the forefront again. Let's think theologically about things and acting like the church. This is probably my biggest thing. Let's act like the church. And so that we have our practices, our churchly practices, whether that's worship, whether it's just my daily life, that I conform myself to Christ, on my practices. And then we have a clear focus on our purpose. What are we here to do? We're here to proclaim the gospel to the world. We're here to make men followers of Christ. There's that great verse in Colossians 1 that we are training, teaching everyone with all wisdom so that we make everyone complete in Christ, to make every man complete in Christ. That's what we're here to do. We're here to make people who are followers of Christ. We can't ever lose sight of that. We're here for the sake of the world. Act like the church. And so that means we proclaim. We proclaim the gospel, proclaim the gospel, proclaim the gospel. So practice is purpose, proclamation. We're doing these things, proclaiming the gospel with a clear understanding that we're not letting divisions pull us apart from that number one task. We're doing what we're here to do.
Well, Dr. Biermann, this has been a joy.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for all the time, Brian. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Well, I think we'll likely be over there at convention, so we'll grab lunch or something.
All right.
All right, sounds good. Cheers.
Thanks.